Sup, my fellas. Don't forget to leave feedback, and enjoy the story. The protagonist was an orphan, taken in and raised by Roderick, the head of the greatest warrior house. Ash was devoted to this man and considered him his true father. He grew up to be a powerful warrior, devoting his entire life to service. But just before his death, he learned the truth. His power, known as the 7 Wings, had been stolen by Roderick. He simply took advantage of the boy and discarded him like trash. The protagonist died, but was given a second chance. He regressed back to the past, to his infancy. However, all his memories remained, and hatred burned in his eyes. The infant's body possessed the very power of the 7 Wings. The protagonist was accidentally found by Roderick's older brother, who took him into his home. Ash felt a care he had never known in his past life. The protagonist realized it was the same family, but a completely different person. High-Fried's wife raised the baby and named him Aster. 10 years pass, and Aster grows up within the Viscount household. At a grand estate, High-Fried arrives for a formal gathering where others have been waiting for him. Aster steps out behind him, now a poised young swordsman. He enters the place with quiet confidence and a sword at his side. He courteously helps his older sister Alphen down from the carriage. Alphen thanks him, and their easy familiarity shows how close they have become. Aster watches her with the fondness of a real younger brother. They have come for the annual sword dance assembly. The event is a martial social gathering hosted under the Alheim banner for noble families who pride themselves on combat. It serves both as a display of faith and as a stage where houses measure each other's strength. The competitors are heirs and candidates who carry their family names into the arena. High-Fried leads Aster and Alphen into a hall already crowded with rivals. Whispers immediately spread that the Viscount family has arrived again, now with an adopted boy standing in for the heir they never had. The crowd mocks them as a stain on the Alheim name. Aster recognizes that he is the target of those hostile stares. Alphen tries to reassure him not to mind the malice around them, but she also knows this place crushes anyone who shows weakness. Aster sees her anger and understands how much pressure she has endured here. High-Fried tells him this hostility is exactly the Viscount family's current standing within the clan. He has brought Aster here so he can see that reality for himself. High-Fried asks whether the sight disappoints him. Aster answers that it does not, and even welcomes the coldness. High-Fried is relieved to hear that resolve. Aster remembers that in his previous life this same debut became a humiliation for the Almheims and a bitter memory for him. Now, with the 7 Wings restored, he believes he is no longer the helpless victim he once was. His determination hardens as he looks ahead. He notices hostile figures from the main family watching from above. Several nobles observe the Viscount family from behind the windows like predators sizing up prey. Aster keeps his composure under their scrutiny. High-Fried urges his children to turn this debut into a glorious one despite everything. Aster answers with a confident smile that he intends to do exactly that. As the festival unfolds, the story recalls an age when knights ruled and swordsmanship defined status. Young nobles clash fiercely in the arena to prove their worth. Their culture worships mastery of the blade above all else. Every exchange is treated as a test of ultimate swordsmanship. Victory in these duels is celebrated as a sign of lasting glory. The matches continue with relentless intensity. At the heart of that system stands a single symbol of both might and majesty. That symbol is the medal, the mark that recognizes true martial excellence. A skilled fighter shatters his opponent's weapon and wins the crowd's admiration. The loser is left broken and humiliated before everyone. The winner raises his sword and claims the prestige embodied by the medal. The mark on his hand shows the power and status that come with such recognition. Watching from above, Alphen remarks that the place is just as overwhelming as ever. The sisters who stayed away were wise, because this atmosphere is unbearable even for those used to it. Aster remains silent while the memory of his own past disgrace resurfaces. He remembers kneeling in defeat while others laughed over him. Alphen notices his distant expression and calls his name. She asks if he is nervous about his first sword dance festival. He says it is not nerves at all, but a loathing sharpened by memory. Alphen cannot quite understand the depth of that answer. High-Fried leaves briefly for a meeting and entrusts Alphen to Aster's care. Alphen protests that she is older, but Aster teases that her clumsiness is exactly why she needs watching. High-Fried tells Aster to use the occasion to mingle with others his age and build connections. Privately, he warns Aster to make sure no one discovers the truth about the 7 Wings. Aster knows hiding that secret in this nest of enemies will not be easy. The surrounding nobles continue to glare at them with open hostility. Aster dryly notes that socializing is difficult when everyone is so openly hostile. Then he spots someone important among the crowd. Ignoring Alphen's call, he starts walking away with a purpose. He claims he is only going to make some friends. He heads straight toward a lounging group of arrogant young nobles. Their leader, Dallas, greets him with contempt and demands to know who he is. Aster introduces himself to Dallas as if greeting an old acquaintance. He calmly states his full name and calls himself Dallas's younger brother. He explains that he saw them from outside and came over to say hello. The group immediately identifies him as the Viscount family's adopted child. Dallas mocks him for daring to carry the Alheim initial despite not being true blood. Aster remembers that Dallas and Grian are legitimate heirs of the main family, and the very two who killed him in his previous life. Faced with them again, he is almost disappointed by how small and pathetic they now seem. The men who once terrified him now look like spoiled children playing at cruelty. Still, hearing his own name from them sends a sharp jolt through him. Alphen rushes in and tries to pull him away before the exchange escalates. But Dallas turns his attention to her and recognizes her as Alphen. He taunts her for hiding behind her father and orders her to stay and entertain them. He frames the demand as a command from the main house. Alphen refuses outright and rejects the idea that the branch family exists to obey the main line. Aster stops her from leaving because he has not finished with them yet. He tightens his grip as his own resolve sharpens. He turns back with a colder expression, ready to confront them directly. Dallas senses that Aster knows more than he should and probes him. Instead of answering, Dallas cruelly attacks Alphen's family, sneering that her father failed as a knight and was maimed by his own brother. The insult hits Alphen like a blade and leaves her shaken. Dallas presses further, boasting that at least he does not carry the blood of losers. Alphen can no longer endure it and demands that he take those words back. She strikes him hard in defense of her father, drawing blood and shocking everyone nearby. Dallas retaliates with even uglier contempt, belittling her family as useless women who cannot inherit. He threatens to humiliate her further by drenching her in drink as if she were unworthy of noble dignity. Alphen stands trembling, humiliated and furious, with liquid already staining her clothes. Watching this, Aster realizes he had feared he might feel nothing when he met these people again. But seeing them torment Alphen proves that his anger is still very much alive. He reaches for the bottle before Dallas can use it again. Alphen, still shaken, senses that something dangerous has changed in him. Aster calls Dallas's name with chilling calm while taking control of the situation. Dallas raises the bottle defensively, suddenly less certain of himself. Aster tells Dallas and Gryan that it is almost comforting to see they are still the same pieces of filth. In the next instant, the bottle bursts over Dallas instead. Aster stands over the stunned group with his sword drawn, and Alphen realizes he has taken over. He tastes the liquid and dismisses it as nothing more than grape juice. Then he mocks Dallas as a bratty noble perfectly suited to such childish cruelty. A memory surges up of High Fried once stopping his uncontrolled power 3 years earlier. In that past incident, Aster had lashed out to protect his sisters from mortal danger. The family had desperately tried to calm him as the Seven Wings erupted around him. High Fried realized then that the Seven Wings concealed terrifying destructive power. Even he wondered whether such force could ever truly be controlled. Aster remembers that the power had once consumed both himself and those around him. Back in the present, a servant bursts in to warn High Fried that something terrible is happening. High Fried is interrupted in the middle of a conference with powerful nobles. He is told that the sons of the main and branch Elheim families are now locked in a duel. High Fried is stunned by the news and realizes the situation has exploded beyond a mere social slight. An older noble watches with hard focus, setting a tense, judgmental mood before the duel begins. A silver-haired father steps forward armed and alert, and someone below recognizes him in alarm. A red-haired girl rushes to him, desperate to know what has happened to Alphen. As father and daughter reunite, a rough-looking man notices them and immediately senses a useful development. From the balcony they look down on a formal sword dance gathering at the prestigious magic house of Elheim, where a duel is already underway. The onlookers lean over the railing, realizing that what happens in the arena may determine far more than a simple match. Elsewhere, a nervous blonde noble feels the pressure of the situation, while a pale observer lingers behind him in silence. The rough man predicts the gathering could descend into chaos, clearly entertained by that possibility. In the arena, the red-haired duelist mocks his opponent's dual pole style as something flashy but impractical in real combat. He raises his blade and identifies his own technique as the four-wing crest, boasting that a true ducal heir stands on a different level. He presses the humiliation further by demanding that his opponent reveal his own crest if he dares compare himself. He frames the challenge as a test of pride, implying that hiding one's pattern is proof of inferiority. Aster answers with cool contempt, treating that kind of prideful display as beneath him. The red-haired duelist is visibly thrown when his taunts fail to shake Aster. Aster turns the exchange around, saying status means less than actual skill, and the other man accepts the duel in anger. The red-haired fighter lunges first, vowing to crush Aster and make him pay for his insolence. He follows with a fierce downward strike, trying to overwhelm Aster through sheer aggression. Aster absorbs the attack cleanly and holds his ground without losing composure. With a subtle shift of grip, Aster prepares to answer with technique rather than force. His opponent unleashes the four-wing crest, surrounding his assault with red power and renewed confidence. The empowered strike crashes in, meant to end the exchange through speed and pressure. From above, the red-haired girl cries out for Aster as the attack seems to land. The rough spectator dismisses Aster's swordsmanship as immature and assumes the result is obvious. A burst of force fills the arena, and the crowd reads it as proof that the four-wing crest has decided the contest. The narration explains that if ordinary magic is like a candle flame, the power hidden within four wings is something far more explosive. The red-haired duelist drives that explosive power into a relentless spinning barrage. He mocks Aster for losing his earlier confidence now that real pressure has begun. Aster remains calm inside the storm and challenges him to prove that his boasts were not empty. Provoked, the red-haired fighter commits fully and demands that Aster show his true strength. Watching from the side, the nervous blonde noble prematurely concludes that the match is already over. Aster's blade cuts through the pressure with a precise line of force, signaling a sudden reversal. He intercepts the assault head-on and turns the clash back against his opponent. The red-haired duelist is stunned that his advantage has been checked so easily. Aster coldly tells him that his biggest weakness is talking more than he can back up. With one sweeping counter, Aster blows him off balance and seizes control of the duel. Golden energy coils around Aster as he stands centered and unshaken, revealing a far greater level of mastery. He launches into a rapid sequence of strikes, moving so cleanly that his opponent cannot properly respond. Aster's expression stays flat as he continues the assault with effortless precision. The barrage lands hard, driving the red-haired duelist backward and forcing pain and panic out of him. His footing buckles under the pressure, showing that he is no longer controlling the exchange at all. A shocked spectator realizes that his brother is being dominated instead of winning. Aster bears down with overwhelming force, and the red-haired duelist can hardly believe he is being pushed back. Desperate, the duelist clings to his identity as a four-winged heir, as if rank alone should make defeat impossible. Aster looks down on that claim without emotion, unimpressed by bloodline or title. He answers with another crushing strike that smashes through the resistance. The surrounding students are stunned, realizing Dallas is being completely overwhelmed and may actually lose. Aster drives him across the arena in a blazing surge, turning the duel into a one-sided rout. The witnesses can only mutter that Elheim still produces monsters of this caliber. Caught inside the golden onslaught, Aster presses in for what looks like a decisive finish. From the balcony, the silver-haired father recognizes the danger immediately and warns that the situation has become serious. Aster drives himself forward through a violent surge of power, straining to force an attack through. Before he can finish it, a red-haired young man cuts down at him from behind and maims him in a sudden betrayal. The attacker revels in the opening he has created, convinced he has seized control of the situation. Aster answers with an overwhelming burst of golden force that turns the momentum back on his enemies. Caught inside that power, he desperately tries to stop himself, realizing too late that he is losing control. From above, someone cries out for Aster to stop as the destructive force spreads through the hall. The blast crashes into the floor and tears through the room, throwing the confrontation into chaos. A stern noble watching from the balcony remains composed, measuring the disaster rather than panicking. On the floor below, a black-haired young man lands amid the wreckage with his sword driven into the ground. The red-haired cousin, now sprawled in the mud and rubble, can only complain bitterly about how humiliating he looks. The black-haired youth studies him in silence, his attention sharpening as his thoughts settle. He looks up toward the nobles above and inwardly rejects the identity that had been forced on him. The red-haired girl on the balcony leans over in anxious relief, watching what he will do next. With new clarity, he decides he is no longer the powerless as she used to be. That realization triggers a deeper recognition, and his expression hardens as he senses someone important. The atmosphere turns ominous as a red pressure fills the hall, announcing the arrival of a far more dangerous authority. He immediately understands who that presence belongs to. The source is an older lord whose cold, crushing aura makes clear that he stands above everyone else here. The young man faces the staircase as the noble patriarch appears at the top, dominating the room. He identifies him as Roderick, and the name lands with personal weight. The onlookers realize the family head himself has come down over what should have been a petty dispute, and the scale of the incident suddenly changes. As Roderick approaches, the black-haired youth recognizes that the matter has become dangerous enough that he may not be allowed to leave unscathed. He steels himself, acknowledging that the man before him is the head of the Elheim main family, the 8th-generation lord. Meanwhile, the red-haired cousin, bruised and filthy, still grins because he believes his father's arrival guarantees victory. The young man stands directly before the patriarch, refusing to retreat despite the difference in status. Roderick looks down at him with restrained contempt, already judging him. The youth answers that pressure without bowing, meeting the lord as an equal in spirit if not in rank. The cousin scrambles forward on his knees, eager to turn his humiliation into punishment for someone else. He clutches at his father and points out the black-haired youth as the one responsible. He insists this is the half-breed who has been ruining his life and begs his father to act. Roderick accepts the accusation with a calm, dangerous readiness to make an example of the boy. To prove his authority, he drives a blade down through his own son's hand and pins it to the floor. The cousin's confidence collapses into agony as he realizes he has become the sacrifice in his father's lesson. The watching youths recoil in horror, stunned by the brutality of what they have just seen. Even those who expected cruelty are shaken by how casually Roderick inflicts it. Roderick declares that anyone who disgraces the family deserves punishment, even his own blood, and that the weak have no right to complain. A voice from above tries to stop him before he goes further. Ignoring that plea, Roderick raises his sword toward the black-haired youth and declares him unworthy to bear one. The room seems to hold its breath as the threat of execution hangs in the air. Even the wounded cousin falls silent, sensing that the scene has moved beyond his control. Roderick's gaze sharpens with murderous intent as he prepares to strike. The black-haired youth intercepts the blade with his own and stands between Roderick and the fallen cousin, openly challenging the patriarch. He states that his cousin still has not apologized to Sister Alphen, making that insult the true issue in his eyes. Then he addresses Roderick as uncle and demands that, if punishment is to be given, it should be for that offense instead. Roderick dismisses him as an orphan taken in by charity and questions whether he truly believes he belongs to the Elheim family. The youth answers that he is the Viscount's son, that he learned enough from his father to know what honor should look like, and that birth does not erase that truth. That reply gives Roderick pause, especially with the family and witnesses watching from above. He finally admits the matter concerns the Viscount's dignity, and the pride of the Elheim name, not a trivial quarrel to be brushed aside. The stern noble on the balcony recognizes the weight of that admission and waits to see how the family will answer it. Another observer agrees that the insult can no longer be treated as a childish squabble, because it has become a matter of family honor. A pale-haired onlooker watches the confrontation with amused interest from the balcony. An older noble coldly reminds the room that Astor's father already paid for disloyalty with his arm, framing the family's fate as settled. With a blade at his throat, Astor is pressed to admit what he is truly willing to lose. Astor answers his uncle with formal restraint, refusing to be cowed. He insists this was no petty attack but a proper duel, and that he only defended himself against the Viscount's son. The Duke listens in hard silence, measuring the boy rather than dismissing him outright. Astor rejects the idea that family honor must be avenged through him, declaring he owes those relatives nothing. Nearby, the red-haired girl trembles while another witness steadies her, showing how dangerous the dispute has become. The pale-haired spectator mocks the idea of punishing a 10-year-old, exposing how absurd the outrage sounds. That taunt makes the Duke pause and reconsider the situation. He accepts Astor's explanation and shifts from judgment to a test. Instead of condemning him, the Duke orders Astor to take a fighting stance. Astor is caught off guard, realizing the old man intends to prove something by force. He braces just as the Duke's attack comes too fast to follow. The impact tears through the hall and blasts Astor away with overwhelming power. The red-haired girl can only watch in horror, fearing he has been crushed. One of the nobles panics and cries out for Roderick as the strike lands. But Astor launches back through the chaos, refusing to stay down after the Duke's blow. He counters in midair and actually forces the Duke to defend, turning the test into a real exchange. The Duke absorbs the attack and drives through the clash, still firmly in control. As dust and frost-like debris settle, worried voices call to the Duke, unsure whether the boy's counterstrike did real damage. For a moment only the wreckage remains visible, hiding the outcome. A witness realizes with shock that Astor survived the Duke's assault. Astor emerges battered but standing, having blocked with a slab of stone and sheer resolve. Bloodied and breathing hard, he falls into a grim silence that shows how close to his limit he is. The Duke studies him with new respect, no longer seeing a child to be disciplined. He turns away from the duel, his decision already made. From above, the ruined hall and shaken nobles make clear that Astor's stand has changed the room's balance. Roderick rushes to Astor's side, stunned by what the boy just endured. He catches Astor before he collapses and calls his name in alarm. Astor weakly reports that he protected the girl, her father, and the promise tied to them, treating that as all that mattered. Roderick answers with open admiration, assuring him that he did more than enough. The Duke descends toward them, drawing everyone's attention back to his verdict. He rebukes Roderick for handling the matter in such a childish and reckless way. The red-haired girl bitterly explains that they chose this ugly compromise because otherwise the main family would have destroyed her father's reputation. The narration makes clear that Astor, still only 10, faced the great Duke himself and endured a strike that should have broken him. Even those who dislike the main family admit that surviving such a test is extraordinary, though they had feared the Duke might kill him. The Duke concludes that Astor is a dangerous force in the making, the kind of talent that could shake the world if allowed to grow. As the tension breaks, the girl rushes to Astor while Roderick supports him, relieved he is alive. The scene shifts to a brighter day, carrying the story forward from the hall's judgment to its aftermath. Now outside, other youths react with surprise as they witness Astor training. Astor overwhelms a sparring partner in a single fierce exchange, knocking him down before he can recover. The defeated trainee can only praise the skill that beat him. Someone addresses him respectfully as young Master Astor, showing his standing has changed. The other trainees marvel that a 10-year-old is this strong and assume his return from the academy must have transformed him. They add that he even crushed Lord Roderick's third son, feeding his growing reputation. Their gossip turns resentful toward the main family's long oppression, and Astor quietly hears that the mood around him is shifting. At that moment, Astor reflects that he once enjoyed the academy's swordsmanship and now moves with practiced confidence. He remembers that this body had been weak and talentless, but his real strength came from experience carried over from another life. He realizes that if he could push this body as far as his old power once went, he could reclaim the level he truly wanted to reach. Astor admits that in his current state he still cannot defeat Roderick. Instead of giving in, he steadies himself and searches for another way forward. He reflects that the sword he is using is only a latent magic weapon ranked around 1 star. What truly matters is his unstable 7 wings power, which can be drawn out but not properly controlled. That makes his gift feel like wasted potential despite its overwhelming force. He wishes he could test the limits of 7 wings somewhere it would not spiral out of control. For now, he channels that frustration into a decisive strike and sweeps through the remaining opponents. Once the clash ends, he quickly checks whether anyone is still willing to challenge him. No answer comes except the sound of dropped weapons and retreating resolve. The training ground is left covered with defeated students, confirming that Astor has overwhelmed them all again. As he turns, someone remarks that he has gone too far once more and that Astor never seems to understand restraint. A red-haired girl arrives with a message that his father is calling for him. Astor immediately heads out, puzzled by the sudden summons. On the way, his attention shifts to the unusual outfit she is wearing. She notices his stare and waits for him to explain himself. Astor points out that it is rare to see her dressed like that after claiming she hated wearing it. She brushes it off as a matter of balance, and says beating him has given her the motivation to keep trying. Before he can respond, she playfully presses the tip of her wooden sword toward him. With a teasing smile, she promises to claim plenty of his time once she returns. Astor accepts the threat in good humor, clearly used to her intensity. Their exchange ends lightly even as the battlefield around them still shows the aftermath of his victory. Elsewhere, Astor announces himself and enters his father's office. He politely asks why he was called, but the mood is serious from the start. His father cuts straight to business and orders him to sit. Astor obeys, sensing that this is not an ordinary family talk. His father reminds him that nearly 10 years have passed since Astor was brought into the family. He reveals that he had intended to wait longer before raising this matter. Then he places a radiant red gem before Astor, prompting immediate recognition. The gem is identified as the proof of the next family head. His father plainly states that he wants Astor to succeed the Viscount house. He explains that the family is in a precarious position and can no longer delay the question of succession. As rulers entrusted with their own territory, they have obligations they cannot neglect. Leaving the seat of the next head vacant any longer would only deepen the danger around the house. Astor's first concern is whether his sisters would accept such a decision. His father says he will personally inform them when the Knight Commander returns and the family can gather. Astor immediately thinks of his sisters Marta and Kudo and how badly this news will land. He can already tell they would not welcome him being chosen over them, especially Kudo. His father awkwardly admits that Kudo already resents him for being a boy fortunate enough to possess 7 wings. Astor refuses the offer outright. He argues that he still cannot control his own magic and is too immature after nearly killing his sister. Trying to soften the tension, he jokes that nothing can persuade an angry sister anyway. His father responds with a faint smile, recognizing both the humor and the sincerity behind Astor's refusal. He tells Astor that he has never been sure whether to treat him as a child or not. The father then reveals that what he truly intended to give Astor was a reward for winning the sword dance assembly. He suggests that Astor would value this reward more than the title of heir. The moment Astor realizes what is being offered, his composure breaks. His father opens a wooden case and names the treasure inside. It is the magic sword Gram, the magic devouring blade said to control 7 wings power. Soon after, father and son head into the forest to test the weapon somewhere isolated. When Astor wonders why they did not simply use the training hall, his father makes clear that this caution is necessary. Astor is reminded that he has a habit of breaking things, setting up why his father is wary as he brings out a special weapon. His father explains that the magic sword Gram is a treasured heirloom passed down through the eldest sons of the Elmi family, and that he brought it from the main house specifically for Astor. He unlocks and presents the weapon with deliberate care, emphasizing its importance. Astor is caught off guard by the unexpected gift and what it might mean. The weapon looks like a sword, but its unusual form immediately signals that it is no ordinary blade. To demonstrate, his father channels magic into it and unleashes a violent red slash, showing that the sword only becomes complete when fed with power. He explains that Gram has no blade of its own and instead forms one from the wielder's magic, turning potential into a cutting edge. The demonstration tears through the area with overwhelming force, proving how dangerous the weapon can be. The aftermath leaves a tunnel of destruction, making the lesson impossible to ignore. His father adds that with enough magic, Gram can even produce a cursed blade, hinting at a more sinister level of power. He offers the sword to Astor and challenges him to try it for himself. Astor accepts the weapon, crossing from curiosity into commitment. As soon as he pours magic into Gram, the response is immediate and far stronger than expected. Golden power erupts wildly from him, and Astor realizes he has triggered something far beyond a normal reaction. He understands that the sword is drawing in his magic on its own, as if resonating with him rather than merely obeying him. A pillar of light shoots into the sky, making the event impossible to hide from anyone nearby. Observers in the distance are startled and can only guess at what kind of phenomenon has just erupted overhead. When they ask what that strange light was, the answer comes with immediate suspicion. A red-haired girl identifies the source at once and concludes that Astor must be responsible. Back in the forest, Astor is thrilled, recognizing that the sword truly suits him. His father, however, is less impressed by the sword itself than by the extraordinary power Astor just revealed. Looking at the spiraling sky, he identifies that power as Astor's own rather than the sword's. He reveals that no one in the entire Elmi family history has ever possessed a 7-wing crest, making Astor unprecedented. If Astor learns to control that power, his father says he could surpass even the family's greatest 6-wing warriors, including him and Roderick. Astor immediately sees the possibility of surpassing the man who has overshadowed him. But his father warns that exceptional power always invites conflict. If others discover that Astor has 7 wings, his gift will mark him as different and dangerous. He warns that people will not simply admire him, many will envy him or resent him. Some will try to exploit him, while others will decide he is a threat that must be eliminated. So before that future arrives, his father urges him not to remain weak and helpless. He reaches out and tells Astor plainly to become stronger now. Astor takes his father's hand and resolves to stop living as the broken, powerless person he used to be. He thanks his father and vows to master these 7 wings no matter what. 3 days later, the family returns home, where they are welcomed back at the estate. A lively red-haired woman announces her own return as Kudryavka and immediately takes over the room's attention. She pauses just long enough to size up the situation before making her move. With theatrical warmth, Kudryavka opens her arms and calls for an affectionate reunion with her younger sisters. The younger girls rush instead to embrace the white-haired sister Marfa, leaving Kudryavka's grand welcome completely ignored. Still trying to salvage her moment, Kudryavka asks whether one of them will at least hug her. The girls refuse, complaining that she always ruins their hair when she gets too affectionate. Kudryavka sulks and insists she has refined her hugs into something perfectly proper, though no one believes her. Then she notices Alphen standing apart and shifts her attention to the easier target. She pounces on Alphen with overflowing affection, treating her like a beloved little sister. Alphen protests as Kudryavka smothers her anyway, proving the others were right to stay away. While the reunion plays out, someone notices that Astor is missing from the gathering. His father dismisses the concern, implying that Astor is off on his own for a reason. Kudryavka's expression sharpens, suggesting she understands more about Astor's absence than she says. Elsewhere, Astor is in the middle of brutal training, driving Graham hard enough to trigger another explosive surge of red power. He fights to control the weapon's force, but the strain leaves him gasping as the energy whips around him. In the end, Astor admits in frustration that he still cannot properly wield it. Astor forces a blade into existence with magic, but the effort drains him so badly that he cannot understand how his father ever wielded such power with ease. As the unstable weapon flares in the forest, he is left frustrated by how far he still is from matching the standard set by his father. His training is interrupted when his older sister Kudo returns and immediately notices he has overexerted himself again. Astor greets her with awkward warmth and lightly complains that she came back without even seeing him first. Kudo answers with teasing affection, making clear she has not forgotten him at all. She reveals she came because she heard about the Academy Sword Dance gathering and his recent success there, along with praise that their father must be proud. Astor deflects the praise and insists that compared with her record of missions and achievements, she is the truly accomplished one. He points out that she was even the only knight honored with a special medal this year. Kudo dismisses that distinction as insufficient, because what she really wants is to inherit their father's position. She presses Astor about his refusal to discuss succession, wondering if he stepped aside for her sake. Caught off guard that their father told her, Astor admits that was part of his thinking. Kudo quietly confesses that she does not believe she is ready to take that role yet either. As she turns away, she admits that both their father and Astor are being cruel to her in their own way. What hurts her is that they know her ambition and still force her to confront it without giving her certainty. Astor is startled when her mood shifts from vulnerable honesty to something more dangerous. Without warning, Kudo swings and sends a cutting wave through a tree, turning the conversation into a test. The sudden strike tears through the forest and makes it clear she intends to judge him by force. Astor barely avoids the blast, shocked that she attacked him so abruptly. Even while scrambling clear, he protests at being dragged into this by his own sister. Kudo decides that after all this time, she will personally measure what he is worth. She announces that the next attack will be serious, dropping any pretense of a harmless spar. Astor tries to stop her by warning that his magic sword is still incomplete. Kudo rejects the excuse and asks whether an enemy on a battlefield would ever care about that. Her framing of him as if he were already in real combat leaves Astor momentarily thrown. She reminds him of a knight's creed to always be battle-ready and warns that if he keeps holding back, she will crush him. The pressure of her advance makes Astor realize this is no playful lesson but a genuine threat. As she closes in with overwhelming force, he panics that he can barely control his magic as it is. Still, he understands he has no choice but to fight back, because otherwise Kudo may actually kill him. He meets her charge head-on, his unstable red blade colliding with her blue power in a violent clash. Their exchange detonates through the forest, scattering debris and showing that neither side is holding back. Kudo praises his sharpened sword skill, but only to underline that he still has not earned the right to stand beside her. She immediately tears into the weakness she sees most clearly, refusing to let him hide behind the excuse of an unfinished weapon. Her real verdict is brutal. His control over magic is effectively non-existent. Driven back by that judgment as much as by her attacks, Astor struggles to keep his footing. Even under pressure, he recognizes this merciless intensity as the same side of Kudo she has always had. To him, her current assault is only the grown version of the relentless rival she was in childhood. He recalls that even as children she angrily challenged the idea that being the eldest and born into the Viscount's house automatically made her the rightful heir. She also rejected the notion that her rare Wincrest talent alone should decide the family's future. What truly drove her was the belief that Astor himself was her natural rival, the one obstacle she had to defeat with her own strength. That old rivalry carries straight into the present as her attacks keep hammering the forest around him. Watching her now, Astor realizes she is acting exactly as he expected, with the same obsession over proving herself against him. He braces and raises his unstable blade again to withstand another crushing strike. Kudo finally states the heart of her anger. In her eyes, Astor is unfit to become the next head of their house. Elsewhere in the manor, their mother worries to their father that leaving the two siblings alone may have been a mistake. She fears their rivalry could escalate so far that one of them is seriously hurt. Their father remains calm, insisting that although the two are reckless rivals, they know their limits and will not go that far. Their mother is not reassured, but can only hope his confidence is justified. She then asks why he summoned Wynax from the Knight Academy if it was not merely to discuss the succession. He answers no and reaches for something hidden away, revealing that he has another purpose entirely. When she sees what he has produced, her shock shows that his true reason is far more serious than she expected. A summons from the Elheim main house arrives, and the elders make it clear they want to see their grandson. The message carries the weight of the family's highest authorities, turning the visit into a serious development rather than a simple invitation. A white-haired woman recognizes at once that this changes the situation in a major way. Aster's guardian fears the worst and admits that this could cost them Aster himself. Before that worry can settle, the matter shifts into a violent confrontation in the forest. Aster rejects the accusation that he ignored advice out of pride, insisting he already refused the old man's proposal. His red-haired opponent twists that refusal into proof that he resents being corrected at all. She overwhelms him head-on, and Aster realizes her strength is far beyond what he expected. To him, her pressure feels less like a duel and more like being crushed by a giant hammer. Even when he tries to meet her blow with his sword, her force drives straight through his defense. Their weapons clash, but the exchange only confirms that she controls the fight. As Aster tries to disengage and regain footing, she cuts him off before he can reset the battle. She calls out his retreat for what it is, forcing him to face the fact that he tried to run from the clash. Her next strike detonates through the area and sends him reeling again. Battered and cornered, Aster can only admit that her raw physical power is monstrous. She mocks him for relying on swordsmanship alone, calling that incomplete and inferior. She immediately adds that magic by itself is just as inadequate. In her view, true excellence only comes when sword and magic are used together as one. Disappointed, she judges Aster for failing to reach that standard. Aster recalls the old measure of talent by wings of mana, where each additional wing marks a vast jump in power. By that logic, her 5-wing level should place her far below his 7-wing potential in output and stamina. Yet instead of trusting that advantage, he abandoned a direct contest of power and retreated to pure swordplay. She presses the point mercilessly, asking whether he distrusts his own power that much. Then she strikes at his deepest wound by suggesting he fears losing control again like he did 3 years earlier. That accusation shocks him, because he has never thought of himself as someone afraid of his own 7-wing power. For the first time, he wonders if he has been unconsciously limiting himself all along. Looking at his unstable blade, he realizes it may be because he has been trying to suppress his magic instead of accepting it. The red-haired woman reveals the bitterness behind her taunts, admitting that Aster possesses everything she ever wanted. If he is going to waste that gift through arrogance and self-denial, she demands that he hand it over instead. Driven by envy and frustration, she launches a full-power attack to take by force what she believes he squanders. Aster steadies his grip and stops resisting the truth he has just uncovered. When her attack crashes down, his released power blasts it back in a violent surge. She is stunned that he repelled a strike she put everything into. Aster thanks her sincerely, because her provocation finally made him understand what he was doing wrong. He charges without even forming a proper blade, moving on raw, newly accepted power alone. She panics at the idea that he could still have strength left, but immediately realizes he has not exhausted himself at all. Aster concludes that his true strength is independent of the 7-wing standard and does not need that measure to exist. He decides that if he has found a power that is truly his, then he must master it directly instead of fearing it. She tries to sneer at his breakthrough, but the insult no longer controls the exchange. Aster answers with calm resolve that in this second life he refuses to waste what he has been given. He rejects not only the dangerous power and sword in his hand as defining truths, but also the idea of living for them alone. What he truly refuses to lose is the family he has now, the one he could never obtain no matter how hard he struggled before. His mention of a second life catches her off guard, hinting at a truth she cannot understand. With his resolve settled, he unleashes a new red power through his sword and surges forward. He follows through with a speed and ferocity that no longer resembled the hesitant fighter from moments earlier. His movement becomes so abrupt and overwhelming that even she loses track of him mid-exchange. By the time she realizes he has vanished from her sight, he is already inside her guard. Aster commits fully at last, deciding he will stop restraining himself. For the first time, fear breaks through her confidence as she understands the balance of power has reversed. He brings the red charge strike down at point-blank range, pressing the duel into its decisive turn. A red-haired young woman jolts awake in bed, disoriented and immediately aware that something is wrong. As sunlight fills her room, she realizes she is somehow back in her own quarters instead of where she expected to be. A familiar voice confirms she has only just regained consciousness. She recognizes Sister MANHWA, who calmly notes that she slept for quite a while. The girl abruptly remembers the duel with Aster and demands to know what became of it. MANHWA explains that Aster carried her back after she collapsed in the middle of their fight. According to him, the strain of the journey had finally caught up with her and made her pass out. She immediately rejects that explanation, sensing that it does not match what really happened. Replaying the duel in her mind, she is certain Aster had her beaten in the final exchange. She concludes that he must have dismissed his mana blade just before impact, sparing her at the last instant. What she still feels in her body, she realizes, is only the leftover force of that attack. With a clearer head, she also admits Aster likely never intended to truly kill his own sister. Even so, in that moment she had fully believed he meant to kill her, and that fear still lingers. That thought softens into reluctant affection as she reminds herself that, for all his defiance, he is still her little brother. She grabs her weapon and urgently asks where Aster is now. Refusing to accept an ending where he simply disappears after sparing her, she prepares to go after him. MANHWA tells her she is already too late, because Aster has left after being summoned to the main house. The news catches her completely off guard. MANHWA adds that he departed with their father, and is surprised the sister had not been informed. She is left stunned by how thoroughly she was kept out of the decision. The realization hits harder when she understands he was taken straight to the family estate without a word to her. Outside, the carriage carrying Aster away is already racing toward its destination. Inside, Aster looks out quietly, already bracing himself for what awaits. His father explains that the people they are going to meet are the retired but still powerful elders who back the Elhim family from the shadows. These hidden rulers, though no longer public leaders, still dominate the family's true power structure. His father cannot understand why such figures would suddenly take interest in Aster now, especially after adopting him years ago. Aster suspects the summons is connected to what happened at the Sword Dance Festival. He has heard that the Elhim elders prize the family's honor above even blood ties. In those stories, anyone who stains that prestige is cast away as prey for monsters. Alarmed, his father presses him on where he learned such things. Aster brushes the question aside and reveals he has already prepared himself for punishment, even exile if necessary. His father, troubled by that resignation, asks whether he truly intends to leave without even saying goodbye. Aster insists it is fine, saying he had planned to depart once his sister returned anyway. He even claims Kudryavka would be more at ease if he were gone. Confidently resting a hand near his sword, he says he has finally learned how to handle Graham. Because he can now draw on the 7 wings more than ever before, he intends to survive whatever comes without anyone's help. His father starts to protest, worried that Aster is overestimating himself and walking into danger alone. That warning is cut short when both of them suddenly notice an unexpected interruption. Aster realizes in shock who has caught up to them. Kudryavka appears at the carriage window, having chased them down herself. She clings to the moving carriage, and Aster can only stare at the fact that she ran all the way there. Furious that he tried to leave without a single word, she forces her way in and reminds him that she heard about the summons from the main house guards. Their father immediately warns that he cannot take her along to the main house. She says she already knows that, and only came because their father had called her there so the siblings could spend time together while he was away. To her, this summons means Aster is walking into something serious enough to demand extreme caution. She repeats Malfa's warning that he may not come back from the main house at all. Aster tries to downplay it as a mere conversation, though he privately admits returning safely is far from certain. Kudryavka cuts through his calm act and demands that he listen to her. She bitterly points out that as a boy blessed with the 7 wings, he is always granted special treatment. Yet beneath the resentment, she confesses that he is stronger and more grown than she is despite being younger, and that is exactly why she cannot bear the thought of losing him. Aster quietly accepts that, whatever else has changed, he is still being treated as precious family. Lord Hyfried reinforces it, reminding him that no matter how capable he becomes, he is still the youngest in their eyes. His red-haired sister turns that affection into a challenge, insisting he return so they can settle their rivalry properly. She refuses to let him leave with an easy victory over her pride. Driven by that promise, she leaps from the carriage and heads off on her own terms. Aster is left wondering why she came all this way just for that, while Hyfried recognizes it as the mark of a worthy rival. Aster answers with a faint smile, grateful for her concern even as he accepts the challenge. From the road, she vows she will return, leaving him with a promise to be met again. Soon after, Hyfried and Aster arrive at the Elhim estate and are formally received. The guards inform them that the Great Elder is already waiting inside. Hyfried tries to proceed alone, but the escort makes clear that strict orders require both father and son to appear together. Aster immediately reads the insult in that decision and senses the family intends to make an example of them. Even so, he stays composed, already bracing himself for what kind of reception awaits. The sight of the castle stirs an old unease in him, reminding him of the last time he called this place home. As they cross the training grounds, Hyfried warns Aster that he already knows how this family operates. He urges him not to lose control today, no matter what is said, while Aster makes it clear his restraint will depend on how far the others push. Hyfried bluntly agrees that the family itself is the real problem. He begins to explain who they are about to face, trying to prepare Aster for the encounter. But Aster's attention drifts to the trainees, and he notices Dallas is absent despite his usual need to dominate every scene. Hyfried catches his distraction and pulls him back to the moment. Aster quickly pretends compliance, masking his thoughts with an easy answer. He promises to stay harmless and quiet, joking that his sister already warned him to come back in one piece. Then the doors open, and the family's judgment hall receives them. Their arrival is announced before the assembled Elhim leadership. An old voice greets Hyfried with pointed familiarity, emphasizing how long he has been away. The speaker reveals himself as Hyfried's grandfather and addresses him as a subordinate descendant rather than an equal. Hyfried kneels and formally acknowledges the 6th head after a decade apart. The elder answers with false warmth, making clear that this reunion is not affectionate but political. Aster studies the old man and immediately recognizes him as the true monster hiding behind Elhim's authority. He identifies him as Zenizeh, Elhim, the head of the main family and the source of the pressure filling the room. Looking around, Aster realizes the other seats are filled with powerful branch family figures gathered under Elhim's rule. He recognizes several faces from the Sword Dance Festival and understands this meeting has been arranged with intent. His first concern is whether Roderick is present. The elder tells him Roderick is absent, and the answer lands heavily on both Aster and High Fried. Another family leader explains that Roderick commands the knights directly beneath the royal family. The sixth head dismisses the matter, claiming a man of that rank has no time for petty family business. Aster kneels in silence, thinking that he has never even met his father and never cared to, though that absence clearly carries weight here. He also realizes that if retired elders and current executives have assembled for this, then Roderick's influence must be immense despite his absence. High Fried presses them to stop hiding behind vague accusations and state exactly what offense they mean to judge. The elder mocks him and reveals that the family has already heard about Aster's outburst at the Sword Dance Festival. At that, Aster's memory flashes back to the violence of that incident, and the moment everything spilled over, he stiffens, realizing that event is about to be used against them. High Fried immediately argues that Roderick had already handled the matter personally, implying there should be no further dispute. The opposing elders reject that defense, insisting the public display still stained the Elhim name. They pile on broader accusations, condemning Aster as unruly, dangerous, and unfit to remain tied to the family unless he is controlled. Unable to endure hearing his father blamed for everything, Aster jumps up and tries to take the burden onto himself. He starts to insist that his father had nothing to do with it. High Fried falls silent, tense and pained, knowing Aster is walking into exactly the trap he warned against. Aster catches that hesitation too late and realizes he may have overstepped. The elder sees on it at once, coldly declaring that his lack of discipline proves he is still just a child pretending to be an adult. An elder opens the council by reminding the room that House Elhim commands 12,000 knights and carries the burden of the family name. He warns that despite that strength, the knights are not a single united force, and their power is fractured by competing interests. The threat is not only outside the house, because ambitious rivals are already watching for a chance to seize supremacy, including people seated in this very chamber. The nobles listen in tense silence, some guarded and some faintly amused, as the accusation lands among them. The elder makes their purpose plain. They want reassurance, and they demand proof that the boy tied to Elhim will not bring ruin upon it. To force the issue, he raises the same weapon that once cut the boy during a previous attack. He reveals that the weapon still remembers that blood and can identify the one who protected Lord and Lady Graham. Standing over the kneeling Viscount, he declares that the test will be repeated here and now. With ruthless intent, he orders the boy to prove who he really is by exposing the source of his power. The black-haired youth realizes what is being demanded and tenses as the danger becomes immediate. Before the council can proceed, the Viscount refuses to abandon his son and rejects any settlement bought at the boy's expense. The son is shaken to hear his father openly choose death over sacrificing him. The elder accepts that answer without sympathy and decides to move against the family directly. He plants his staff like a sentence being passed. He condemns the Viscount's line, declaring that if the boy is a threat, the entire branch of the family can be discarded. At his signal, armed retainers rush in and surround father and son with drawn blades. The Viscount turns in alarm as steel closes in from every side. The boy answers the intimidation with contempt, mocking the old man for fearing his own descendant. The elder bristles at the insult, but the boy presses the humiliation further. Even with swords at his throat, he tells them that if they only want his life, they can take it, because that does not frighten him. What he will not allow is any harm to his family, and he makes that boundary absolute. His father freezes, realizing the boy is about to act on his own terms. The boy apologizes to him and admits he can no longer stay hidden or obedient. The guards falter as they sense something impossible beginning to surface. A blazing crest appears across the boy's back, and the room recognizes it as no ordinary mark. Power erupts from him as the crest awakens, and he invokes the ancient belief that 7 wings mark an enemy of Elhim. He warns the council to think carefully before deciding what to do next. The elder and the nobles stare in disbelief as the forbidden symbol seems to match the legendary crest of the 7 wings. Some desperately question whether it could be forged, unable to accept that such a sign could appear on a human body. Others admit the mark is too exact to dismiss outright. The elder addresses the boy directly, demanding to know what he is truly showing them. Half stripped and ringed by blades, the boy turns so they can see the full crest and forces them to confront it. With a crooked smile, he notes that people only grow more unsettled the more wings they imagine behind him. One noble bursts into laughter at the room's panic, enjoying how thoroughly the revelation has shaken everyone. He quickly reins himself in and invites the elder to continue, as if this chaos were merely an interesting lecture. The elder begins explaining the old doctrine. In ancient times, spirits granted magical organs to humans, and those powers were inherited through bloodlines. Over generations, noble houses refined that strength, turning inherited power into the foundation of their status. Yet according to that history, no human ever reached 7 wings. Only the spirit clans and the crests themselves stood at that level. The boy challenges the implication, asking whether they are trying to brand him as one of those spirit beings. The elder replies that if the 7 wings are genuine, the exact category matters less than the threat they represent. The Viscount remains trapped under blades, forced to listen as his son is judged as something beyond the family. The boy rejects their labels and reminds them that, whatever else he may be, he was born the son of a Viscount. What matters to him now is simple, whether they intend to make him their enemy. He points out that even if Elhim cast him out, many other great houses would compete to claim someone bearing 7 wings. To every noble in the room, such a symbol would be a weapon, a treasure, and a force great enough to rival the highest powers in the realm. That possibility stuns the council, because they suddenly see not a child to suppress but a political force they cannot easily control. The boy reveals he has already looked beyond this room and seen a future in which the empire itself is engulfed by war. He declares that to survive what is coming, he intends to decide for himself who stands with him and who stands against him, even if that means taking dangerous risks now. The elder answers with a grim, knowing smile, impressed that the boy has thought so far ahead. But he still refuses to accept the claim at face value, insisting that there is no proof yet that those 7 wings are real. The black-haired youth coldly warns that if the others doubt his claim, they can go ahead and kill him. The old patriarch understands the threat immediately. If they do that, they risk turning the ward against themselves. He judges that if Elmeling truly acts, killing this boy would be effortless, and he waits to see whether the provocation will force a response. A hidden force begins to move around the restrained youth, hinting that someone is already interfering. Seeing the argument going nowhere, the silver-haired noble cuts in to redirect the situation. He proposes settling the matter with a trial by death instead of endless debate. Ignoring the alarm around him, he frames the test as the proper way to judge whether the boy deserves the power of the 7 wings. He adds that the boy's fate can still be decided afterward, making the trial sound like a convenient compromise. He openly challenges the idea that the world's greatest martial clan lacks any suitable ordeal for such a candidate. The youth recognizes the speaker as Earl Mays and realizes this man is backing him. He concludes that Mays is acting as an ally, at least for now. The patriarch accepts the proposal and orders the boy to follow. As they leave, he dismisses the boy's insolence as the fault of a grandfather who failed to discipline him. They arrive at a dark underground trial ground hidden behind bars and chains. The patriarch explains that this chamber lies beneath the manor and connects to the waterways. What was once an emergency shelter now houses a magical beast, and defeating that creature will be the entire test. A knight complains that the boy keeps creating trouble and exposing secrets the 7 wings tried to hide. The youth takes the chance to arm himself, deciding this is too good an opportunity to waste. His escort warns him not to lower his guard. The boy drops into the pit himself, choosing to face the trial directly. As he descends, he sharpens his focus and studies the darkness below. Above him, Maze watches with quiet satisfaction, as if the situation is unfolding exactly as he hoped. The boy lands in shallow water and confirms the chamber is as dark as promised. But his unusual sight lets him see well enough to keep moving. What he spots next shocks him into a sudden halt. From above, the patriarch reveals that he also intended this trial to let another man recover his honor. He contemptuously recalls that man's disgraceful death, saying he failed to act until the very end. He warns the boy not to disappoint him too as the beast stirs nearby. The youth raises his sword and prepares himself when the creature comes into view. A huge lion-like magical beast lunges at him, and the true trial finally begins. The patriarch declares that if the boy dies here, the family can simply claim he perished during the test. He goes further, treating the boy as another stain on the house and implying his death would be worth mourning only as a family embarrassment. The beast charges, but the boy hesitates for a split second as he processes what he has seen. He answers with a swift slash that drives the monster past him instead of letting it crush him. His follow-up cuts carve across the beast in a clean, controlled counterattack. The onlookers react with surprise when they realize the boy handled the charge far too easily. The boy remarks that compared with his sister, this monster is far less frightening. As the beast falters behind him, strange purple growths and fumes begin spreading through its body. The sudden change catches even the boy off guard. He realizes the creature is not merely a magical beast but something far worse. The truth becomes clear: the monster is undead. The knights above are horrified that an undead creature has been hidden beneath the manor. The patriarch calmly explains that the thing was drawn by the scent of death and likely crawled up from the waterways after feeding on corpses. He admits he kept it here because ordinary methods could not destroy it, and he used it to test people's strength. He even notes that this arrangement conveniently solved the family's problem of disposing of bodies. One noble protests that capturing such a creature is difficult even for skilled knights, so sending the boy alone is effectively murder. The patriarch dismisses the concern, arguing that if a wing candidate dies here, it only proves he was an empty ornament unworthy of the title. Below, the boy looks up as if about to object or call out. The patriarch reassures the others that even the boy's death could still be useful to their plans, which only deepens the cruelty of the test. Maze remains silent behind the bars, watching the scene with unreadable calm while the others reveal how expendable they consider the boy. Watching from above, a pale observer dismisses Aster's bravado as empty talk. Below, the undead beast surges at Aster in a storm of violent energy, pressing him to the brink. As he counters, Aster realizes his slashes are landing without truly affecting the creature. He identifies the problem. This undead monster regenerates far faster than ordinary ones. Aster reminds himself that an undead body is already dead, so normal damage means little. To destroy such a thing completely, it must be burned away by sunlight or an equivalent force. The other option is a holy weapon capable of purifying the undead outright. Since he has either, Aster understands he is fighting at a severe disadvantage while others remain in danger behind him. Even so, he refuses to retreat, deciding that if this is what being one of the 7 wings means, he has to prove himself now. He draws on his power and commits to overwhelming the beast through sheer force instead. A massive red strike tears across the chamber as Aster unleashes that power without holding back. The impact smashes the ground and buries the area in dust and debris. The onlookers are stunned by the scale of the magic and begin to grasp what the 7 wings truly represent. From above, the spectators anxiously wonder whether Aster has actually finished the monster. The elder studies the dust in silence instead of celebrating. Through the settling smoke, Aster remains standing, still poised for battle. The elder calls the outcome unfortunate, signaling that the fight is not over. Before Aster can react, something crashes through the smoke and blindsides him. The blow drives him hard into the rubble and leaves him momentarily helpless. The beast emerges intact and seizes him, proving his attack was not enough. High Fried panics at seeing Aster caught and in immediate danger. The pale man coldly restrains him, mocking the idea of trying to save everyone at once. High Fried protests that standing by would mean watching Aster die. The pale man stays calm, implying High Fried is missing something important. He points out that Aster still has one last card to play. Pinned down, Aster steadies himself and reaches for that hidden reserve. The beast bears down on him, pleased that the plan appears to be working and that Aster's resistance is weakening. In response, red power coils around Aster's body and weapon as he forces himself back into the fight. He drives that power directly into the monster at point-blank range. The strike finally tears into the beast deeply enough to make it bleed and recoil. Aster commits to a brutal solution. If one blow is not enough, he will keep repeating it until the creature dies. His power erupts into a spiraling vortex that shreds through the beast again and again. Watching this, High Fried realizes this is not the same technique Aster used before. He understands that Aster has produced something new in the middle of battle. The red vortex expands violently, turning the chamber into a storm of destructive magic. As the structure begins to crack apart, the bystanders scramble to escape the collapsing arena. The attendants urgently guide the elder away from the edge while debris falls around them. The elder finally recognizes that he is witnessing something extraordinary. At the center of the storm, Aster smiles as he grasps the true power of the 7 wings. When the violence subsides, the shaken officials can barely process what just happened. Looking into the ruined pit, they realize the magic beast has vanished completely. The elder concludes that Aster trapped the relentless undead in a vortex of raw magic and annihilated it. He judges the feat as crude but overwhelming, a display of pure magical quantity rather than refined technique. Aster lies amid the aftermath, hearing that his impossible result is being linked to the work of the 7 wings. When asked whether he orchestrated this, the elder denies any involvement. High Fried admits that even he is continually surprised by his son's growth. The pale examiner then asks the elder for the final verdict on Aster's test. After a brief pause, the elder decides that no one could reasonably object to passing him. The examiner cheerfully announces down to Aster that he has passed. He tells Aster to come up, noting that the weaker spectators were nearly swept away by the force of his attack. Aster coolly proposes a simpler way into the building, showing he is already thinking in terms of infiltration. From outside, someone checks whether the old man inside is truly willing to proceed with this secret meeting. Aster confirms he has no interest in the old man himself, and only came because refusing would have closed off a useful opportunity. The elder dismisses Aster's modesty and makes clear he sees through it. He identifies the hunger in Aster's eyes and recognizes him as someone driven by ambition. The old man goes further, accusing Aster of planning to turn the current unrest in Elheim against the ruling family. He even guesses Aster's real target is Roderick's position, startling him by how accurately he has been read. Still, the elder eases the tension by saying he is not here to pry into Aster's schemes. Aster presses the contradiction, wondering why a rebel would spare someone tied to his enemies. The elder explains that the rebels are divided, and that Roderick's extremism makes him a problem even to some of their own side. He implies Aster's existence can serve as a check on Roderick, so he is willing to let that stand. But he warns that if Aster ever turns his fangs on him, the consequences will be severe. Leaving the meeting, Aster privately curses the old rebel leader as a dangerous monster. Outside, Earl Mays asks what was said, and Aster reveals the elder wanted to draw him into the rebel family but he refused. Mays is caught off guard by that answer. He masks it quickly and remarks that Aster has passed up a valuable chance. Mays argues Aster would have been treated far better under the main family's protection, reminding him of his lowly branch status. Aster challenges him, asking why Mays had earlier nudged him toward this path if he truly believed that. Mays dodges the deeper motive and claims he only wanted to play a prank on a spoiled heir. Then he shifts to what matters to him. Aster has now truly become the master of the 7 wings. He tells Aster to pay attention to what that title really means. Mays explains that many in the hall had already sensed the 7 wings awakening in him, and that his rise will draw scrutiny from every faction. He warns that the name alone carries enormous weight, and from now on those who target Aster will only multiply. Aster immediately asks whether that makes Mays one of the 7 wings as well. Mays pauses, measuring how much to reveal. He answers indirectly, saying he serves as director of the Knight Academy and that scouting gifted youths is part of his role. He adds that another influential man nearby does the same, hinting that powerful institutions are already watching Aster. With that, Mays says he looks forward to seeing Aster at the academy and leaves the invitation hanging. Aster remains wary, deciding Mays is too slippery to trust as an ally yet. Before they part, another adult reaches for Aster, wanting to hear about the remarkable display everyone is already talking about. That man instead gently steers him toward home, ending the encounter on a practical note. Aster plays it off with a smile, worrying that his mother will panic when she sees how hurt he is. Elsewhere, a knight commander reports that the young master has defeated everyone who challenged him in the trial. His superior, a powerful noble, notes that the child was summoned by the elders of the main family and asks for the rest. The commander says the noble's own son never even entered the young master's thoughts, and adds that he has better news to share. The noble calmly reveals he already understands the true significance. The 7 wings have genuinely taken root in the boy. The commander is shocked that his lord knew all along. The noble reflects that this child's emergence could overturn the balance of power that has kept Elheim stable for generations. Alarmed, the commander suggests they should intervene before that happens. The noble refuses to act. He reasons that if the 7 wings could be stolen so easily, Elheim would have fallen apart long ago. Confident and greedy, he declares there is no need to rush because the 7 wings will eventually belong to him. Until then, he intends to let the boy move freely and enjoy watching him struggle. His thoughts reveal a brutal past, showing he has already crushed others without mercy. He fixes on Aster by name, marking him as the child of the 7 wings and his future prey. For years pass, and applicants gather at the Night Academy to take the entrance exam. Inside the busy reception area, staff call finished applicants forward as the selection process begins in earnest. A newcomer draws attention, and onlookers realize he may be the person at the center of recent rumors. The gossip spreads immediately as people compare the rumor to the leaner figure now standing before them. At registration, the Academy makes clear that injuries or accidents during the exam are the applicant's own risk, and demands a signed agreement before they proceed. An official begins the night selection by demanding each candidate prove noble status through a wing crest, warning that no one without true magical power can fake it. When he calls for Aster F. Elheim to present his crest, the examiner suddenly realizes the name belongs to someone significant. That recognition makes him pause, caught off guard by who has just appeared. Aster answers with dry confidence, implying his crest is not something he can casually display in public. He pushes the point further by suggesting his face alone should already be enough to grant him entry. Outside, the Royal Night exam is drawing crowds and candidates from across the kingdom. As Aster stands apart from the others, someone in the crowd calls him out. A loudmouth candidate singles him out as an arrogant outsider and challenges his presence there. The man, known for bullying newcomers, warns that this exam is reserved for the kingdom's finest knight hopefuls. He gestures toward the royal venue and stresses that this is the elite selection ground for future royal knights. Aster's calm indifference only irritates him more, and the heckler tries to stop him from brushing the insult aside. The bully boasts that everyone here has endured brutal training for years in pursuit of the royal knight title. He mocks Aster's short sword and appearance, insisting he looks like an unworthy amateur. Convinced Aster is just sightseeing, the man orders him to leave before he embarrasses himself. Nearby candidates recognize the scene as the bully's usual ritual of hazing first-timers. But their attention shifts when they realize the target is Aster Elheim, the missing member of a famous family. The name spreads through the crowd, and Aster is identified as one of the 7 wings. That rumor draws in another young noble, who approaches with familiarity and calls Aster his cousin. Aster immediately recognizes the newcomer and turns serious. The newcomer introduces himself as Girion and greets Aster with polished warmth in front of the crowd. Girion smoothly explains that since no one knows Aster's origins, he has taken the liberty of claiming kinship. He follows that with a seemingly sympathetic mention of Dallas's death, testing Aster's reaction. The sympathy turns venomous as Girion declares Dallas deserved to die and implies the family is better off without him. He reveals old resentment toward Dallas and treats his death as the removal of a rival nuisance. Still smiling, Girion dismisses the 7 Wings title as irrelevant to him. What matters to him is that with Dallas gone, no one remains to shield Aster from the family's hostility. Observers realize that 2 members of the Elheim family appearing together means this year's candidates may be caught in a dangerous feud. Even the bully who started the trouble wants no part of a conflict between the main and branch lines of the Elmheims. His fear turns into awkward curiosity as he starts wondering whether Aster really is an Elheim. He finally asks Aster directly if he belongs to that family. Aster answers with a faint smile, no longer needing to hide behind indifference. He confirms his identity simply and formally, introducing himself as Aster to the stunned man. The exam moves to the first venue, a tower where candidates are told to prove they deserve to stand among royal knights. From above, the examiner declares that royal knights exist solely to serve and protect the king. He drives the point home by saying they are blades that stake their lives for the crown, not people who need gentle explanations. He announces that today's test is a battlefield and that each candidate's true worth will be exposed there. Aster privately dismisses the speech as nonsense, but he is satisfied simply to have returned to this place. His thoughts turn to the long path ahead and to the distant goal that still rules his life. At the summit of that ambition stands the man he seeks most, Roderick A. Elheim, commander of the Royal Knights. Aster imagines the brutal climb toward Roderick through countless powerful enemies and vows to reach him. For now, he resolves to survive the selection exam that stands between him and that confrontation. The first test begins without warning as blades are launched into the tower chamber from every direction. The examiner reveals the trial's nature by letting the first victims be impaled almost instantly. Panic erupts below as candidates realize the opening challenge is a lethal survival test inside the tower. The rule is brutally simple. Only those still standing at the end pass. Inexperienced candidates freeze and scream as the airborne blades tear through the room. Others understand too late that hesitation means death and start fleeing in terror. The more seasoned participants rally together, forming defensive groups to cover one another and block the incoming weapons. Watching from above, the examiner notes that veterans of previous attempts know the proper response. Even so, he coldly concludes that only about 30% of them are expected to survive. A voice dismisses ordinary defenses as inadequate, while the trial's deadly rain of arrows cuts candidates down. The examiner makes clear that this test is meant to reveal overwhelming power worthy of the wing crest, not mere survival tricks. One black-haired candidate remains standing amid the slaughter, marking himself as the one the trial is truly exposing. The other survivors notice his stillness and mistake it for terror, assuming he has frozen under pressure. One of them mocks him and expects him to die like the rest. Instead, the silent candidate calmly reaches for his sword, showing he has been waiting rather than panicking. He unleashes a violent red aura and begins turning the storm of arrows aside with sheer force. The nearby survivors recoil as his power suddenly sweeps across the arena. They realize he is not enduring the barrage at all but completely deflecting it. With a confident grin, he invites the trial to come at him with everything it has. The red current around him expands into a spinning barrier that keeps every arrow away. The survivors are shaken by the fact that not a single projectile can reach him. Even the examiner is impressed, recognizing extraordinary mana control behind the feat. The black-haired candidate effectively wraps himself in a storm of his own making. When the barrage finally ceases, the remaining candidates cautiously wonder whether the ordeal is truly over. Watching from above, the examiner notes that more people survived than he expected but accepts the result. He announces that those still standing have passed the first trial and orders them onward immediately. The battered survivors gather themselves, with the arrogant noble and the black-haired fighter both among those who endured. The examiner refuses them any rest and directs them to the next testing ground at once. One exhausted survivor complains that the examiner is merciless even after putting them through a rain of arrows. The black-haired candidate needles him, amused by how quickly the others are wearing down. The man cannot understand how someone who spent so much mana can remain completely unfazed. The examiner privately wonders the same thing, recognizing that the young man should be showing fatigue by now. He identifies the candidate as Asura of the Seven Wings and becomes eager to see how far this monster can go. As the group moves on, the orange-haired noble keeps a close eye on Asura from the crowd. A brief flashback reveals that the noble, Gryan, was once ordered to stop Asura from ever becoming a royal knight. That command was framed as a duty to protect the future of Elheim, leaving Gryan under heavy pressure. At the next grounds, the examiner imposes identical swords on everyone to keep the coming trial fair. Asura's companion questions the need for the swap, while the officials seem especially interested in taking away Asura's unusual weapon. His companion shrugs that ordinary swords should not be much different from what lower-ranked knights already use. Still, he suspects the staff are being cautious because Asura's original sword is clearly no ordinary blade. Asura accepts the change without protest, quietly taking stock of the situation. Gryan approaches and mocks Asura as nothing more than a servant propped up by his cousin's influence. Asura's companion bristles at the insult, but Gryan keeps pressing the class difference between them. Gryan belittles the companion as a minor country noble and treats him as beneath notice. The companion immediately tries to distance himself from Asura, hoping to avoid being dragged into the hostility. Asura can only respond with awkward amusement as the tension around him worsens. The strained group dynamic becomes obvious, with even the examiner sensing the atmosphere has turned bad. He cuts through it by announcing the rules of the second trial, a siege battle fought in teams. The candidates learn they will compete to seize one another's camps within the forest. Victory will go to the team that captures 2 camps, and each camp is represented by a flag. The examiner adds that almost anything is permitted, effectively encouraging the candidates to treat the battle as real warfare. He then begins assigning the teams for the trial. Gryan is placed under the red flag, leaving him visibly pleased with his position. The blonde examiner's aide stands with another team as the assignments continue. Asura and his reluctant companion end up under the blue flag, with Gryan still watching from nearby. Asura listens as the start signal is explained. Smoke will mark the true beginning of the battle. He quickly grasps the core objective, realizing each camp has 3 flags and that taking 2 camps is enough to win. His companion follows the implication and understands that only one of the 3 teams can advance. Others immediately point out the harsher consequence. To pass, they may have to fight Elmheim's own people as enemies. Asura is caught off guard when the others' fear suddenly becomes obvious. One of the examinees admits they are terrified, not of the trial itself but of what Elphium might do afterward. He explains that provoking the young master of the main Elphium family could bring brutal retaliation on anyone involved. The threat is framed as obvious. Even in a test, pointing a sword at someone of that rank is dangerous. They imagine the worst-case outcome as their families being ruined and their futures as knights destroyed before they begin. So instead of fighting, they choose to forfeit this round and preserve their lives for another chance. The speaker dismisses Asura as too detached to understand the fear of weak nobles trapped under that hierarchy. Asura leaves them behind and pushes forward alone, deciding the silence on the battlefield matters more than their excuses. He recalls that noble houses treat bloodline and status as everything, with the main family standing above all branches. Their surrender confirms for him how deeply lesser nobles have been conditioned to submit. Asura bitterly notes that, as an outsider, he is effectively one of those powerless people himself. As he runs deeper into the field, he realizes no real fighting has started anywhere yet. That unnatural quiet makes him suspect caution, planning, or something more deliberate. A new voice interrupts and reveals that someone has been waiting for him specifically. A blonde swordsman calmly states that events are unfolding exactly as someone predicted, including Aster arriving alone. Aster immediately fixates on that hidden planner. The blonde fighter, Christopher Nolan, casually raises the yellow team's flag and confirms he has set himself free to act. He throws the flag aside and declares that he will personally face Aster. Aster realizes this is no random encounter but a setup. Seeing Nolan now carrying a red flag, Aster understands the teams have been crossed in a way that should not happen. Elsewhere, movement begins as other participants advance under the same hidden plan. At the center of it, Elphium confidently moves with his followers, intent on demonstrating his family's way of fighting. The rules of the second trial are laid out as a 3-team siege battle over enemy bases and flags. Within that framework, Aster and Nolan clash immediately, turning the formal exercise into a direct contest. While trading blows, Aster demands to know why Nolan is acting against his assigned side. He presses the contradiction, pointing out that Nolan should have been on the yellow team. Aster then identifies the real issue. Nolan has deliberately raised a red flag instead. Nolan answers without hesitation that he and Elphium formed an alliance before the trial began. An observer recognizes Nolan as the eldest son of House Nolan, a highly ranked swordsman from the Twin Crest. The same observer notes that both Nolan and Aster had looked unremarkable at first, but their second trial performance exposes unusual talent. Their duel intensifies enough for onlookers to single them out as two of the exam's standout fighters. Even so, the observer regrets that only one can advance, because both have the makings of knights. Back in the fight, Aster repeats the key revelation in disbelief: Nolan truly allied with Elphium. He argues the alliance is self-defeating, since only one team can ultimately win the trial. Nolan reveals the point of the scheme. He intends to let the main house win, while Elphium is likely already attacking Aster's base. Aster instantly imagines his teammates, already cut down, and realizes the danger is real. He confronts Nolan with the ugly truth behind the plan, comparing it to Gryan's earlier warning about what happens to anyone who defies Elphium. Nolan coldly agrees with the logic of submission, saying no one willingly stands in front of a carriage they know will crush them. He reduces the whole matter to the rigid hierarchy of knightly nobility. From Nolan's perspective, sacrificing fairness to protect the privileged is simply the natural order. As Aster blocks another strike, he notices something wrong with his sword and realizes his weapon may have been tampered with. He remembers the examiner handing him that blade and suspects he was deliberately given a defective one. Nolan confirms the hostility behind it, saying this was never a fair duel and that he already disliked Elphium's before Aster ever drew near. He singles Aster out as especially irritating, treating him as a showy target worth crushing. With his empowered blade, Nolan smashes through Aster's failing weapon and forces the fight decisively in his favor. Aster reacts instantly, refusing to lose momentum even as his sword gives way. He abandons the broken exchange, twists free, and launches himself past Nolan instead of continuing the duel. Nolan is stunned when Aster's sudden move slips through his guard. By the time Nolan turns, Aster is already sprinting away toward the forest and the threatened base. Aster leaves Nolan for later, deciding that stopping the attack on his allies matters more than settling this fight now. A blonde knight assumes his opponent has fled and dismisses him as unworthy of the order. His attention shifts when he notices a glittering fragment on the ground near his feet. Picking it up, he realizes someone has left behind a crude shard of mirror rather than a real weapon. He understands this was Elmham's trick and scorns it as a pitiful deception. At Aster's base, Smythe rushes in unexpectedly early, forcing the others to react before they were ready. Grid tells him the delay team bought only a little time, while enemy forces already hold the wall above them. The blonde commander mocks Elmham's claim that he could manage alone and admits he expected at least some resistance. He casually reports that his side has already secured a third base and asks for the status elsewhere, treating the field as effectively conquered. Grid cuts through the taunting and demands to know what happened to his comrades. Facing enemies on all sides, he presses for an answer while the commander keeps his distance above. The commander pauses, weighing how to answer, and his silence itself becomes ominous. Before the answer comes, one of the surrounding men moves to strike Grid from behind. The attacker closes in with false friendliness, reminding Grid that he had warned this rebellion would end badly. He reveals that everyone who openly defied Elmham has already been dealt with. With cruel amusement, he adds that Grid's allies barely put up a fight. The man belittles them as weaklings and implies Grid was foolish to think numbers alone could change anything. From above, the blonde commander corrects Grid's assumptions and declares that the match is already decided. He explains the exam's rule: victory in this stage goes to whoever controls 2 more bases by the end. That means even if Grid keeps running around reclaiming positions, he remains strategically trapped. With too few people left to defend multiple flags, any gains he makes can simply be taken back. The commander lays out the cycle plainly: once Grid moves to another base, they will just retake the previous one and preserve their lead. Confident in that logic, he flaunts his advantage with open contempt. Grid accepts the situation at once and decides that if strategy cannot save him, he will force a different kind of endgame. He resolves to cut down every enemy in front of him. That threat rattles the men around him, even if they try not to show it. The blonde commander dismisses it as an empty bluff. He argues that Grid's sword is worthless, and that no single fighter can beat everyone present, no matter how strong he is. He challenges Grid to try anyway. Certain sheer numbers will crush him. Grid admits the commander has seen through part of the trick, but not all of it. He praises Grid for noticing the sword's secret just before the blade begins to break apart. The nearest attacker is caught off guard as the shattered pieces hang in the air instead of falling harmlessly away. Grid reveals that the weapon performed even better than he expected. Watching this, the blonde commander briefly believes the match is still his to win. The broken sword drops, but the scattered fragments become part of Grid's attack rather than a sign of defeat. Grid's focus sharpens as he commits fully to the counterattack. He bursts forward in a blur, turning the discarded fragments into a sudden killing edge and striking before the nearest man can react. The first opponent is violently thrown back, stunned by how fast Grid closed the distance. Grid chains the motion into a sweeping assault that sends another enemy flying and tears open the formation around him. He catches hold of the remaining hilt and reasserts control over the weapon mid-combat. Red arcs of force explode outward as he carves through multiple enemies at once, dropping men across the arena. From the wall, the blonde commander stares down at the wrecked field in disbelief as his numerical advantage collapses in moments. Grid raises his blade toward him and says the commander made a fatal mistake by revealing himself. He warns that the commander should have stayed hidden, because now he is the one who is going to lose. For the first time, the blonde commander abandons his smugness and recognizes Grid as a monster. Grid launches himself upward in a spiraling surge of red energy, taking the fight straight to the wall. He clears the height in one rush, using the momentum of his attack to reach the commander before a defense can be set. The commander can only protest the absurdity of Grid's speed as the attack bears down on him. Grid coldly tells him he is too slow to keep up. He strikes through the commander's guard, shattering his weapon and driving the blow home at close range. As the commander is sent flying, the scene cuts to a memory of a child recalling the first time he ever flew through the sky. As they plummet, the black-haired fighter realizes he can finally sense the subtle flow needed to manipulate magic power because his body has grown stronger. Using that advantage, he closes in on Gryan midair and mocks how the prison wall that once protected him no longer matters. Gryan panics and tries to stop him before he can act. The black-haired man brings his sword down with overwhelming force while Gryan desperately raises his own blade to block. He calmly notes that the wall's suppression is now weak enough for him to use his power. His strike detonates into a violent blast that tears through the area below. The explosion sends smoke surging high above the courtyard. The onlookers are left baffled by the strange fighting style and wonder what became of the combatants. Their confusion turns to alarm when they sense movement in the smoke. The black-haired fighter emerges from the ruined archway, having won, while Gryan lies broken behind him. He advances in silence, his control and confidence making clear that the fight is over. Without hesitation, he seizes the injured Gryan by the collar and drags him up. Then he throws Gryan back to the ground in front of the others, forcing everyone to face the result. The surrounding prisoners freeze, unsure why no one is moving to help their fallen leader. From the floor, Gryan begs them to kill the black-haired man at once, insisting this is his command. But the black-haired man cuts him off and declares that Gryan no longer has authority here because Alheim gave the order instead. One of the men instinctively rushes for a dropped weapon, still wavering between fear and obedience. The victor confronts them directly, asking if they are truly so terrified of Alheim's revenge that they will keep serving him. A prisoner admits they are, because families like theirs are disposable minor nobles who would be wiped out if Alheim turned on them. He explains that people in their position are crushed no matter what they do, so defying the powerful feels impossible. He bitterly accuses the black-haired man of never being able to understand that desperation because he has always had everything. The accusation makes the black-haired man pause rather than lash out. After a brief silence, he lets out a small laugh at how familiar that grievance sounds. The man who challenged him is unsettled, unable to tell why he is being mocked. The black-haired fighter recalls that his own stepfather once told him the same thing about people with nothing. He admits that he is privileged now, but says that only gives him a responsibility the others do not have. With his sword at Gryan's throat, he makes clear that he is prepared to act on that responsibility himself. He declares that his true enemy is Alheim, and that if no one else will overturn Alheim's rule, he will. He openly vows to crush Alheim with his own hands. The surrounding men recoil in shock at hearing such open defiance. Even Gryan is stunned that anyone would dare say this aloud. One prisoner warns him that he may not grasp the weight of what he has just declared. He answers that he understands perfectly. This is a declaration of war. He goes further, saying blind loyalty to the current Alheim will only end in betrayal and ruin for those who keep serving him. So he strips away their excuses and tells them the only real alternative is to fight. He adds that with the 7 wings behind him, he already has the strength to do it, and now they must choose. He forces the question into the open. When the time comes, will Alheim stand with Gryan or with him? Gryan tries to recover control by threatening everyone, insisting they cannot possibly side against him. He reminds them that he knows exactly who they are and can punish any betrayal later. His threats immediately reignite the prisoner's fear of the consequences. The man who spoke earlier visibly falters, trapped between terror and the possibility of rebellion. The pressure finally breaks his composure. He curses in frustration, unable to endure the deadlock any longer. Then he runs toward Gryan, driven to force a decision at last. Another prisoner warns the black-haired man not to raise false hope unless he truly intends to follow through. He answers with a simple promise that he will. That assurance gives the charging man the resolve he was missing. He throws himself down before Gryan and publicly names himself as Edged of House Smythe. In front of everyone, Edged declares his support for Astureth, Alheim instead of Gryan. The others are stunned, realizing Gryan's attempt to keep everyone under his control has just begun to collapse. With a blade at his face, a battered young man seethes with hatred for the nobles tormenting him. Around him, the other examinees hesitate, and one of them angrily demands to know why they are just standing by. He tries to rally them by framing this as their chance to humble the arrogant elemental branch family and prove the Seven Wings are stronger. The nearby candidates waver, unsure whether to join in. The black-haired swordsman quietly counts one ally, deciding he still needs more flags planted before he can act. Seeing the crowd is still too small, he concludes he needs additional help before making his move. Meanwhile, Gryan remains on his knees, injured and struggling to hold himself together. One of his subordinates reaches out in concern, asking if he can still continue. Gryan lashes out instead, shoving away the concern and venting his fury at being treated like a helpless failure. His rage fixates on Elhem, the branch family rival he blames for reducing him to this state. At the same time, Nolan coldly decides he cannot let this chaos continue if he wants to preserve his standing with the main family. Remembering his brother's brutality, he resolves to act differently rather than leave matters to mutilation and cruelty. Even wounded and bleeding, Gryan refuses to accept that his story will end here in disgrace. Nolan steps into the scene and addresses Elhem directly, forcing everyone's attention onto him. He cuts Gryan down with a calm insult, noting how far he has fallen since they last met. Gryan recognizes Nolan at once and turns his anger on him. He demands to know why Nolan arrived so late, accusing him of neglecting the one job that mattered. For a moment Gryan brightens, convinced Nolan is still on his side and can salvage the situation. But Nolan's presence carries a warning too, because despite sharing the Seven Wings rank, he is the strongest swordsman there. Still desperate, Gryan orders Nolan to kill the black-haired boy immediately. Before he can finish, Nolan's movement cuts him off. Nolan reveals he came not to help, but to return something and settle a debt. He states plainly that Elmham's methods violate his personal code of chivalry. Then he publicly severs ties, declaring their alliance over and leaving Gryan stunned behind him. The other candidates are shaken, realizing Nolan's betrayal has made the sides impossible to read. Nolan turns toward the black-haired swordsman and admits they cannot finish this exam without settling their unfinished rivalry. The black-haired youth meets that challenge without flinching. Nolan names him as House Nolan's pride and his true rival in swordsmanship. He formally pits that rival against the Seven Wings. Drawing his sword, Nolan takes a dueling stance and prepares to prove his superiority. He launches in with blazing force, intent on deciding once and for all which of them is stronger. The black-haired swordsman refuses to indulge the duel yet, saying the matter must wait. He intercepts Nolan's attack with a sudden red-tinged strike that halts the clash head-on. Nolan is startled by how different this opponent feels from before. As their blades grind into the ground, he realizes the black-haired swordsman has grown far beyond his expectations. Even so, Nolan reminds him that only one team can pass this exam. He charges again, arguing that if both of them aim to become royal knights, they cannot avoid deciding the issue now. Nolan presses the point, insisting their ambitions leave no room for compromise. The black-haired swordsman answers that such a conclusion would ruin his own plans. He then shocks Nolan by saying he wants Nolan to become a royal knight too. Nolan stops short, unable to understand what he just heard. The black-haired swordsman points out that it would be absurd for everyone to keep fighting House Elhem only to fail because they were split into different teams. With a confident smile, he reveals he already has a plan to make sure every single person here passes. Nolan is caught off guard by the sheer audacity of that claim. Gryan is equally stunned, suddenly unsure where this is going. The others can only stare as he admits he cannot promise success, but believes the plan can work. He explains that the idea is possible only if everyone cooperates instead of clinging to the exam's divisions. To begin, he approaches the kneeling Gryan as the first piece that must be addressed. Gryan looks up in confusion and exhaustion, bracing for whatever comes next. Instead of finishing him, the black-haired swordsman offers his hand and proposes reconciliation with Gryan. A blue flag is planted, and the act is immediately challenged as a violation of the exam's rules. One candidate angrily argues that Astor does not even understand how the flag-planting test is supposed to work. Astor points out that the stated victory condition only required occupying multiple territories, not that a single team had to plant every flag itself. He explains that his side solved the problem by forming a three-team alliance and claiming all the territories together. His opponent presses in and accuses him of twisting the exam into a mockery through a loophole. Even Astor's rougher allies admit they suspected the trick would never be accepted so easily. The examiner insists that if the goal had been to destroy an enemy, a knight would be expected to kill without hesitation, so mercy is not Astor's decision to grant. Astor calmly answers that sparing an enemy is justified whenever keeping that person alive is more valuable than killing them. The examiner doubles down on the doctrine that knights are weapons of the state, and must not decide such matters for themselves. His outrage makes clear that he sees Astor's judgment as outright insubordination. Astor turns the accusation back on him, asking whether the examiner is disqualifying them out of personal bias rather than any written rule. That challenge leaves the examiner visibly cornered and unable to answer cleanly. Astor presses closer, signaling that he has not finished dismantling the man's position. He warns that if candidates can be failed arbitrarily, the academy leadership is inviting resentment and instability instead of obedience. The examiner realizes he is losing control of the argument. Later, while the officials review the matter, Astor and the others are left waiting for over an hour. The long silence wears on the group, and anxiety starts to replace their earlier defiance. When asked whether everyone might really be failed, Astor admits the outcome is impossible to predict. Still, he treats the delay itself as proof that their case was strong enough to force serious discussion. That measured confidence steadies the others, even if they still cannot read the result. One ally marvels that Astor even managed to get the proud young noble to cooperate, and wants to know how he pulled it off. Astor brushes it aside, implying he simply said whatever was necessary. The waiting ends when an official bursts in and calls everyone to attention. The room snaps toward the announcement, with tension replacing every private conversation. The principal arrives in person to deliver the examination results, signaling that the decision is important. The candidates scramble to focus as the authority of the academy itself takes over the room. The principal demands everyone listen carefully before he speaks. The others recognize him at once, while Astor remains cool and observant. Astor privately dismisses the principal's appearance, judging him by substance rather than status. The principal addresses Astor directly and notes that his case forced an unusually difficult ruling. He explains that evaluating so many candidates at once under these circumstances is unprecedented. After discussions among the academy's highest authorities, they have decided to accept Astor's argument despite serious objections. Astor asks for the practical meaning of that decision. The principal lets the suspense hang for a beat before answering. He announces that every one of them has passed. The room erupts in stunned relief, especially among those who had expected to be rejected. The principal immediately tempers their celebration by warning them to prove this leniency was deserved. Astor and his allies take the victory with quiet satisfaction, knowing they forced the academy to bend. The principal formally welcomes them as new students of the Coruscant Royal Knight Academy. That night, the story shifts from the exam's tension to the beginning of academy life. Relaxing in the baths, one of Astor's allies revels in the luxury and praises how much better life has become. He openly credits Astor for winning them this comfort and status. Astor accepts the praise without much outward excitement, already thinking beyond the immediate reward. The others celebrate around him and pledge loyalty, thrilled that his gamble carried all of them through. A more reserved companion mocks the sudden hero worship but still admits he owes Astor thanks for breaking Gryan's hold over them. Their banter turns to old rivalries, with one insisting he never truly lost to Astor and only settled for a draw. Astor laughs it off and says the important thing is that they reached the academy as candidates from the slums. One ally frames this success as the first small gain in a larger struggle against the ruling Elhelm faction. Astor agrees and declares that this moment marks the true beginning of their rebellion. Elsewhere, a red-haired woman learns that Astor survived and entered the academy before her, and she resolves to catch up rather than let him leave her behind. On the eve of academy training, the protagonist wakes in a communal bath and reminds himself that surviving this place comes before anything else. As he steps out, the other boy's attention makes it clear his appearance has already turned him into an object of desperate interest. He senses something is off and starts to realize they are staring at him with a purpose. When he turns, he finds several classmates poised around him as if they are about to pounce. Their sudden rush catches him off guard, and he recoils as they swarm him. The boys explain that being near someone favored by fate might rub off on them, so they want to use him as a lucky charm before training begins. He rejects the superstition outright, furious that they think his presence can save them. Nearby, another student watches the chaos with detached amusement, already resigned to the absurdity of academy life. That resignation hardens into the sense that the coming year will be exhausting. Night settles over the academy, shifting the story from schoolyard absurdity to family politics and cruelty. In a noble household, a kneeling son is condemned for failing to crush a rival named Gryan and for returning under that rival's influence instead. Helen Elheim treats her son's hesitation as humiliation for the family, and accuses him of letting their enemy insult them unchecked. Forced flat to the floor, he is made to accept that his failure is not personal weakness alone but an offense against the family's pride. Terrified, he begs his mother for another chance and promises to meet her expectations next time. She answers his plea with violence, striking him down before he can finish. Lillian A. Elmheim declares that someone as useless as him does not deserve a next time. She kicks him away like refuse, making the family hierarchy brutally clear. Lillian mocks him as a weakling unfit even for the lowly work of tending magical beasts. Broken on the floor, he begs for any punishment other than that disgrace. His appeal only provokes another attack, and he can do nothing but call out to his sister. Even as the beating continues, his thoughts turn from pain to blame. He convinces himself that all of this misery traces back to Gryan, the one person he now sees as the cause of everything. That hatred connects to an earlier moment when Gryan approached him with a calm offer to cooperate for mutual survival. Confused, the boy had asked what Gryan really meant by it. Gryan warned that if the family elder learned he had failed his exam because of some insignificant grudge, the punishment would be fatal. The warning hit him with immediate terror because he knew it was true. Gryan made the threat vivid by revealing that he had foreseen Dallas's horrific death. Leaning close, he framed that fate as something too monstrous for anyone to endure. He offered a bargain: stay silent, look away, and let him act without interference. In return, Gryan promised to keep him alive. Back in the present, Lillian pauses the abuse when another sibling, Lee, is told to ease up. The family treats the victim's tears and apologies as pathetic entertainment rather than remorse worth accepting. Julius A. Elmheim lounges over the scene and invokes family bonds only to justify control. He insists that family should get along while physically restraining Arfin, making it obvious that harmony in this house means obedience. Arfin remains silent under his hand, trapped between fear and suppressed resistance. Helen turns to the larger issue, warning that House Elmheim's image of overwhelming power is beginning to crack. She blames the change on the spread of Gryan's influence and the rumors surrounding him. Addressing the others, she orders them to make sure everyone remembers what their family truly represents. Lillian understands immediately that this is not about appearances but intimidation. Julius embraces that meaning and calls for a display of genuine brutality. The next day, the Academy's training grounds fill with candidates facing a forest of towering pillars as the formal trials begin. An instructor hails them as future glorious knights and sets the tone for a ruthless competition. The Academy defines a royal knight as an elite warrior who can dominate ordinary soldiers and even other knights. To prove that standard, a candidate launches an empowered strike against one of the pillars. The blow lands hard enough to crack the structure, showing the level of force expected here. As the test continues, the Academy explains that students will be sorted into 6 grades according to ability. Those ranks determine status and access, with the higher grades receiving the greatest prestige and opportunity. The lesson turns blunt. More talent means more advanced training, while the untalented are treated as inferior from the start. Watching the standard being set, one struggling candidate realizes just how badly he may fall behind. The hierarchy is underscored when another student unleashes far greater magical power, proving that raw magic alone can secure a superior rank. A young swordsman demonstrates that he can wield magic and steel together, setting the standard for true first-rate talent. The Academy's creed is ruthless. Only those who master both sword and magic matter, and the weak are beneath instruction. Students are told that if they want elite techniques, they must grow stronger, because this place only grants the freedom to keep proving power. That harsh lesson leaves the onlookers tense and unsettled as they watch the Academy's values made plain. Aster, however, stands over the shattered test pillar in silence after cutting it apart with ease. The ruined magic iron pillar confirms that his strike was no fluke. An instructor cheerfully declares that this level is now the target, while the students immediately protest that it is absurd. Aster ignores the noise and remains focused on his own thoughts. Observers identify him as the rumored 7 wings and recognize his talent as something frightening. They note that he destroyed a pillar as dense as a golem with almost no effort, proving he is undeniably exceptional. But they also warn that the 7 wings' potential is far greater still, and that if he becomes satisfied too early, the monsters in this academy will devour him. The real threat is the Academy's hidden predators, the powerful students who rule through fear. Later, Aster and a companion head inside while reflecting on the Academy's obsession with ranking. His friend complains that even after passing the entrance exam, they are still being judged by merit at every step. He points out that among their peers, only Aster and Nolan avoided starting at the very bottom. Their new placements make the gap obvious immediately, with Nolan placed 1st grade and Aster 4th grade. Aster takes it lightly, and jokes that his friend needs to catch up if they both want to become royal knights, since 2nd grade is the minimum. His friend laughs that Aster is already acting like their boss. Aster is confused by the title at first. The friend reminds him that he was the one who vowed to crush House Elmheim. That boast had already made Aster look like someone willing to stand against the Academy's ruling power. Others had taken those words seriously, and started hoping he might actually change things. So his friend formally offers to follow Aster's lead. He enthusiastically proposes that they bring down House Elmheim together. Aster accepts the idea, but only on the condition that they become much stronger first. He reaffirms his goal to crush Elmheim and admits that he needs more power to do it. Even with that resolve, hunger interrupts the moment, and drags them back to ordinary concerns. They head for food before afternoon training, knowing they will not last on empty stomachs. At the cafeteria entrance, they find a crowd gathered in uneasy silence. When Aster arrives, the students urgently tell him that the Elmheims are inside causing trouble. A voice from within casually identifies Aster while eating, making it clear he has been expected. The speaker mocks Aster for taking so long and says he started without him. Aster comes face to face with Julius Elmheim, who addresses him as brother and sits beside his sister Lillian. That single word makes Aster's companion realize the family connection is even worse than he thought. The students explain that Julius is the 2nd son of the main Elmheim line and Lillian is his sister. They are infamous as the tyrant siblings, the cruelest pair in the family. Aster immediately understands that the worst members of his family have come here too. Lillian taunts him with false affection, calling him her ugly little brother while looming over a student on the floor. The victim can barely breathe beneath the metal restraint clamped over his face. Aster's friend recoils at the grotesque mask and demands to know what it is. Aster recognizes it at once as the iron shackle. Julius explains with amusement that it is a torture device House Elmheim uses to punish failure. He is impressed that Aster knows so much for someone he had dismissed as a soft branch family child. Then he humiliates the masked student further by pointing out that despite carrying the Elmheim name, he still ended up in 6th grade. Julius calls that placement pathetic and treats the boy's suffering as entertainment. He claims the mask is a gift from an older brother meant to make the boy try harder. The cruelty goes further. Food, water, and even air are turned into rewards for obedience. Julius reveals that any desperate task will do, because once the mask is on, removing it means death. Aster's friend realizes in horror that many students around them are already wearing the same device. Julius presents those masked upperclassmen as starved beasts and mockingly tells the newcomers to greet their seniors properly. He orders one of the masked students to show his face, pretending this is all some friendly reunion. He adds that it has been a long time since Aster saw his sister, baiting him toward a more personal wound. A red-haired masked girl steps forward, and Aster freezes the moment he sees her. He realizes with shock that the girl under the mask is someone he never expected to find like this. Julius savors the moment, and remarks that Aster's sister has changed a lot. The girl stands rigid and silent, trapped behind the same degrading restraint. Aster finally breaks and calls out to Sister Arfin. Arfin glances back, tense and shaken, but says nothing. Rage overtakes Aster as he reaches for his sword. His hand closes around the hilt with sudden lethal intent. He charges Julius and demands to know what was done to her. The iron shackle flies free as Aster's attack tears it away. Julius remains unnervingly calm even as the confrontation turns violent. The broken mask crashes to the floor beside the student it had tormented. Aster declares that he came prepared for every one of them. Julius welcomes the bloodshed as if it were a party arranged for the newcomers. He orders his subordinates to stop hesitating and recruit the new underclassmen into Iron Lead by force. He promises them a decent meal if they succeed. At his command, masked seniors rush forward with swords to drag the newcomers back in shackles. Aster's friend realizes too late that these seniors are not mindless weaklings but capable fighters acting under coercion. Even the blonde prodigy sees that the attackers are genuinely competent. Aster's ally understands that House Alheim moved sooner than expected, and that the current power gap is dangerously wide. Pressed by the attack, his friend desperately asks Aster for a plan before they all end up enslaved too. Aster answers by stepping into the middle of the assault instead of retreating. In a single violent exchange, he drops the first wave around him. His expression hardens into something colder and far more dangerous. The surge of killing intent around him is so intense that even his allies are shaken. Aster turns his fury directly on Julius and demands to know what he thinks he is doing. Julius brushes the accusation aside and calls it goodwill. He claims Aster lacks talent and that the weaklings around him only pass by clinging to his strength. From Julius's perspective, low-quality underlings disgrace the elite, so he sees no problem in purging or reshaping them. He insists he will not tolerate half-hearted weakness, so he has decided to deal with all of them at once, in the brutal style of House Elmheim. Aster cuts through the excuse and returns to the real issue. He demands that Julius remove that vile device from his sister's face. He makes it clear he wants it done immediately, not after another speech. His blade reaches Julius before the words have fully settled. But Arfin suddenly intercepts the strike herself, forcing Aster to halt in disbelief. She meets his eyes in silence, neither attacking him nor stepping aside. The siblings' blades clash, and Aster is left reeling from the fact that his own sister blocked him. Julius twists the knife by claiming Arfin stands beside him because she chose to. He tells Aster to ask her himself if he doubts it. Lillian mocks the scene, delighted by Aster's confusion. Aster remembers their mother worrying because Arfin had stopped sending word, and realizes this nightmare is what became of her. Still refusing to accept it, he throws himself back into the fight to pull her away. He insists she no longer has to obey people like them. He tries to promise that he will save her, but Julius snaps at Arfin for hesitating, furious that she is holding back. He orders the others to kill Aster if she will not do it herself. The blonde swordsman Nolan steps in and declares that if Arfin cannot strike, he will take Aster's head himself. Julius contemptuously tells Nolan he is even more classless than Julius's own brother, unworthy of calling himself a knight. Nolan answers by drawing his sword and openly challenging Julius Elmheim. He vows to carve the style of House Nolan into Julius's flesh. The challenge is punctuated by another shattered shackle falling away. Julius mocks the idea that studying the sword longer than others makes Nolan a great knight. Nolan refuses to be shaken by the insult. Julius counters that Nolan has misunderstood everything. He reveals his true specialty by channeling magic into overwhelming heat. The flames race over Nolan's arm, burning through his defense and forcing him back in pain. Julius boasts that the strongest person is the one who gets to rule. With that principle, he blasts Nolan away and sends him crashing across the room. Aster's friend rushes to Nolan, calling out in alarm. Nolan can barely answer through the pain as smoke rises from the burns. While the others struggle, Lillian admits she enjoys crushing the pride of men who act noble. She decides to keep Aster's friend alive as a personal pet and casually singles him out. She dismisses the injured Nolan as unnecessary and worthless to her. Together, the siblings preach that weakness is a sin and that only the strong have the right to speak or decide anything. Aster looks past them and sees their philosophy made real as masked students force shackles onto others in the background. The room fills with cries for help as more victims are restrained and silenced. Aster recalls the warning that anyone content with their current strength will eventually be swallowed by someone stronger. Julius spreads his arms and asks Aster what kind of person he intends to become. He presses the question further by demanding to know which side Aster will choose. Aster answers with action, hurling himself at Julius in a burst of murderous resolve. Their blades collide in a violent explosion of red force and fire. For the first time, Julius is forced to acknowledge that Aster may be more dangerous than expected. Aster drives in close and keeps pressing despite the heat and impact. His fury sharpens into a focused, relentless attack. Julius retaliates by seizing him by the throat and engulfing him in flames. Aster's friend can only shout his name as the fire closes around him. Even while burning, Julius sneers that this is all the Seven Wings can do. He starts to dismiss Aster as another disappointment. Then he warns Aster not to get arrogant just because he managed to parry one attack. He claims Aster has only survived a single strike so far. Aster answers by turning Julius's own power into a spiraling counterattack. Julius finally realizes something is wrong. He understands too late that Aster is absorbing his magic and winding it back against him. The smug certainty drains from Julius's face as the reversal takes hold. Aster unleashes the stolen force in a massive red torrent that tears through the room and hurls Julius away. Landing from the exchange, Aster coldly asks Julius to repeat what he was saying. He advances on the battered air and mocks the speech Julius had been giving from his throne. Then he specifically asks Julius to repeat the line about trash being kept quiet. Julius can only stare back, stunned and furious. Aster throws Julius's own contempt back at him, making it clear he has not forgotten a single word. Watching from the side, his friend can only mutter in disbelief at what Aster just pulled off. Even Lillian is forced to admit that Aster really did knock Julius down. Aster rejects the idea that this is enough. Julius rises from the wreckage, complaining more about the pain and the insult than the danger. He is still vain enough to worry that Aster might have damaged his family crest. That absurd reaction leaves Aster's friend stunned, because Julius appears almost completely unharmed. Lillian's brief, uneasy pause shows that even she recognizes the fight has entered a far more dangerous stage. Lily mocks her brother for getting himself cornered and treats his predicament like a joke. Even as she toys with him, she insists he should remember that being humiliated still stings. Aster erupts in fury, accusing Julius of pushing things too far and turning the situation into a challenge. Julius answers with open contempt, revealing he had never taken Aster seriously and was only indulging him. The taunting gives way to lethal intent as Julius unleashes a blazing attack and dares Aster to survive it. Aster cuts through the posturing and prepares to answer force with force. He tells Julius to stop talking and come at him directly, turning the confrontation into a head-on clash. Julius commits to the attack, driving his fire and sword forward with full confidence. Aster meets the assault instead of retreating, bracing himself to break through it. Before either side can finish the exchange, a new voice intervenes and halts the fight. The interrupter identifies himself as Earl Mays and makes it clear this chaos was never going to be ignored. As a director, Mays declares he cannot stand by while the academy is turned into a battlefield. Julius resents the interference, and reminds Mays that a lesser branch of the family has no right to meddle in his affairs. Mays brushes off the insult, and gently but firmly reminds Julius that a top-seat candidate cannot afford such a disgraceful scene. He frames Julius's outburst as beneath his status, and pressures him to think about how this reflects on him. Mays then asks Aster to de-escalate as well and put away his weapon for the moment. Julius waits for Aster's response, still burning with anger but no longer pressing the attack. Though irritated and burdened by the trouble this caused him, Julius reins himself in. He decides to let the matter pass for now rather than continue under scrutiny. With a final warning, Julius ends the confrontation and withdraws, signaling that his tolerance is temporary. Aster tries to stop him, unwilling to let the matter end before he gets answers or satisfaction. Mays physically checks him before he can reignite the conflict. Still smiling, Mays asks Aster to preserve his dignity and not make things worse in front of everyone. Aster's attention shifts when he notices a masked red-haired girl among the onlookers. Recognizing her, he calls out to his sister in sudden alarm. She acknowledges him only with a tense, silent glance. Aster realizes she is deliberately keeping her distance from him. Instead of answering, she removes the mask that marked her as one of the captives. Seeing the discarded mask, Aster identifies her as Sister Alphai and understands she was among those taken. Later, in a private meeting, the group regathers to assess the damage and vent their anger at Julius. They confirm that Nolan was badly taken out of action. Lily adds that several of their comrades were also dragged away while wearing those strange masks. One ally asks Aster what he intends to do next now that the situation has escalated. Aster turns the blame toward Earl Mays, arguing that Mays should have stopped this before it got so far. A woman in the room rebukes Aster for speaking that way to the man who just intervened on their behalf. Mays calms her and explains that he deliberately stepped back because Aster was the one who needed to act. That answer makes Aster realize Mays may have been testing him all along. Aster pieces together that Mays likely wanted to see whether he would protect his own people and where his loyalties truly lie. Even so, Aster still cannot tell what Mays is ultimately aiming for. The woman presses Mays directly, demanding to know how a director could tolerate such abuse. Another ally echoes the outrage, insisting that the victim's status does not excuse tyranny. Mays answers coldly that as an executive of House Elhim, he does not challenge the family heads unless the matter crosses a very high threshold. Aster rejects that excuse and points out that forcing masks onto people to control them should already qualify as intolerable. Mays counters that the school is fundamentally a training ground for knights, and if harsh methods produce stronger candidates, he has little reason to oppose them. He further reveals that Julius's faction is thriving under this system and that even the principal tacitly accepts it. Aster concludes that the institution itself cannot be trusted to protect anyone. Mays warns him not to rush into enemy territory to retrieve the captives, making clear that such a move would be reckless. He explains that the main family is already watching Aster's every move and waiting for a mistake. The warning becomes explicit. One wrong step could let the family cast him out whenever they choose. Aster refuses to accept caution as a reason to leave his people behind. Aster condemns the iron shackle as something far worse than punishment, because it corrodes a person from the inside. He explains that the device strips away freedom, speech, dignity, and eventually even the will to resist. To him, its true horror is that it turns people into obedient tools. The silver-haired listener realizes Aster speaks with the certainty of someone who has seen this cruelty firsthand. Aster avoids naming the source directly, but makes clear he knows what happens when that torment is allowed to run too long. That warning lands on the others, and one of them admits he cannot bear the thought of his friends ending up that way. The silver-haired man starts to suspect Aster may be speaking from personal experience. Before that suspicion can be pressed, Aster reassures them that he has no intention of letting matters reach that point. He adds that he also wants to avoid expulsion, so he intends to settle the conflict without open disaster if possible. The silver-haired man challenges him to prove he has an actual plan. Aster answers by producing the shackle, implying that his methods should already be obvious. With a grim smile, he declares that this is how he intends to fight. 3 days later, the students are driven through harsh training under the open sky. One classmate worries that Nolan is pushing himself despite his injuries. Nolan refuses to slow down, insisting class is about to begin and there is no time to rest. He dismisses his wound as trivial, though his companion sees the same old stubbornness in him. Even so, they agree the more troubling problem is Aster, whose behavior has become impossible to read. Aster continues the training in silence, masked and relentless, while others watch him uneasily. That tension leads into a confrontation, where armed students accuse him of having the nerve to return after what happened before. Their spokesman makes it clear he still holds a grudge over Aster's earlier actions. The group also resents that Aster forced his way in and tried to negotiate as if he had any standing. Their blonde leader confirms that Aster has walked straight into exactly the trap they expected. Aster states his purpose plainly. He has come to take back his sister and his fellow students. To show he is serious, he tosses the iron shackle before them. He offers a bargain. If they place that shackle on him, he will submit to their terms. His sister is horrified that he would even suggest sacrificing himself like that. The blonde leader recognizes the chance to leash a dangerous rebel and turn him into an example. Another captive mocks Aster's offer as degrading and absurd, unable to understand why he would choose such humiliation. Even the enemy leader sees Aster as a thorn in Elhim's side, though he doubts simple obedience is all Aster intends. He presses Aster to reveal what game he is really playing. Aster gives nothing away and claims there is no hidden scheme. The leader does not believe him, but keeps listening. Aster points out the practical truth. The mask is sealed with magic, and only they possess the key, so once restrained he would be at their mercy. He taunts his cousin directly, asking whether he truly has the confidence to break him. That challenge ignites the blonde man's temper and pride. Provoked into accepting, he agrees to the wager. But instead of immediate submission, he raises the stakes and turns the deal into a test of endurance. He declares that Aster must survive 10 days while wearing the shackle without food, water, or losing any limbs. If Aster is still breathing at the end, the captives will all be released. Aster's sister desperately protests, knowing the terms are effectively a death sentence. She begs him to stop before he gets himself killed. Even as the burden drives him to one knee, Aster accepts the bargain and repeats that he knows better than anyone what the shackle does to a soul. He addresses his sister directly, making clear that his resolve comes from a lifetime of being raised as a tool for Elhim. He remembers the Alf in him as a stubborn child who would never bend easily. He also remembers his sister as someone who looked delicate but was always stronger than she appeared. Seeing that same sister now unable to stand up to these people fills him with bitter disappointment and pain. A darker, ruthless side of Aster surfaces, telling her to stop trying to save him because weakness has no place in what comes next. Back in training, an instructor catches a collapsed student trying to recover and demands to know why he has stopped. Another exhausted student is immediately berated as well, denied even a moment to breathe. Barely holding himself together, the masked trainee curses the ordeal and wonders why he has to endure this at all. Aster's companions worry that the harsh training and lack of proper food are pointless cruelty, especially since he has already gone days without a mask or real support. One of them bitterly concludes that if Aster survives this, it will be sheer karmic payback rather than mercy from anyone around him. Even while trying to encourage him, they are unsettled by how long he has endured and by his refusal to show weakness. Aster keeps running as if his stamina has crossed into something inhuman, pushing far beyond what should be possible. His observer recalls that an ordinary person should only last a few days without food or water, with a week being the absolute limit. And that estimate only applies to someone conserving energy, not to someone forcing himself through constant strain. Yet Aster spends those same days in brutal combat drills, burning through what little strength he should have left. He is even made to haul heavy logs through water, proving that his body should have collapsed already. Trying to explain it, one of the trainees brings up an old rumor about the child the Viscount once took in. The story claims that infant crawled alone for miles through a mountain range buried in deep snow. If that tale is true, they begin to wonder whether Aster's life force is abnormal from the start. Aster himself dismisses the legend as exaggeration, but the red aura around him hints that he may be hiding more than he admits. Elsewhere, the scene shifts to a locked interior where prisoners wait in fear for another round of humiliation. A cruel purple-haired woman arrives with attendants and mockingly announces feeding time as if she were tending vermin. With a flick of mana, she opens the cell and asserts complete control over the captives. The prisoners immediately tense, knowing this visit means degradation rather than relief. What they are given is barely food at all, a scrap of cheese and a cup of water. One starving captive realizes this starvation routine has repeated for days and fears he will die if it continues. Driven by desperation, another prisoner begs the woman for real food, appealing to her as if she might still have pity. Instead of answering, she stomps the meal into the floor and makes his hunger part of the punishment. She coldly tells him that if he did not want it, he should have said so, turning his plea into an excuse for more abuse. Then she points out that someone else is suffering even worse, using comparison to deepen the prisoner's helplessness. That someone is Astor, who sits apart in silence, conserving himself and refusing to beg. The woman mocks his self-denial, calling him saintly while carving meat in front of him to test his resolve. A blonde noble joins the torment, taunting Astor's sister Arfin and suggesting she comfort the brother whose misery is supposedly her fault. He laughs that Astor's current suffering exists because of her, making guilt another weapon against the family. Arfin can barely contain her anger, but all she can do is think of Astor and choke back her outrage. Bound and powerless, she is left wondering what she is supposed to do while watching him endure this. The blonde man grows irritated because Astor still has not used any hidden trick to escape, despite being pushed to the brink. Astor's continued stillness only deepens their confusion, because he has shown no resistance at all. The noble decides that if pride is all Astor has left, he will keep pressing until that finally breaks. Smirking over his meal, he commits himself to dragging out the torment just to see how long Astor can hold on. But Astor's silence is not surrender. Inwardly, he is enduring every second while preparing something of his own. His thoughts turn to mana control, recalling that power can be shaped into a blade sharp enough to cut. He also remembers that the same force can harden the body into armor, proving that mana changes form according to intent. The lesson behind it is that mana is flexible, and its role depends entirely on the user's will. A further memory shows that this flexibility can even imitate a horse, carrying someone through the forest at impossible speed. It can also become a second set of eyes, reading an enemy's movement before the attack is made. That insight lets Astor anticipate pursuers and seize the initiative instead of being cornered. He gathers red mana around his feet, choosing movement rather than direct confrontation. The power erupts as a violent spiral of wind, turning the battlefield itself into his weapon. His attackers are caught off guard as the red current wraps around them before they understand what he has done. Only then do they realize he has transformed mana into wind and trapped them inside a spinning vortex. Astor vanishes from their sight within the storm, forcing them into panic as they lose track of him completely. He reappears from above like a falling strike, driving down through the center of the chaos. The impact smashes through his opponents and leaves them reeling before they can recover. The memory ties back to formal instruction. In advanced training, students are taught to perceive and manipulate mana directly, though ordinary drills forbid it. For those born with a crest, that teaching opens methods of killing that do not rely on a sword at all. Their instructor makes the point brutally by killing a bird with pure mana and warning that such techniques must be mastered. Back in the present, Astor stands over fallen enemies with red mana coiling around him, showing that the lessons he endured have become the source of his power. Several days into ironclad training, Nolan isolates himself in the forest and pushes through harsh practice on mana control in mock combat. He forces red mana through his hand, trying to gain enough control to survive the coming exam. His goal is to catch up fast enough to protect his sister and the others from the free. But he realizes effort alone is not enough, and that waiting passively will never close the gap. He measures himself against Julius, whose overwhelming power needed no sword to dominate him. That memory reminds Nolan that Julius never even had to fight seriously because Nolan was still far beneath him. Refusing to be trapped at this level, Nolan drives himself harder despite the cost. Even exhausted to the point of collapse, he searches desperately for anything that might make him stronger. A sudden wave of dizziness interrupts him before he can continue. He realizes his body is failing him. The world tilts, and he drops to the ground as the strain overwhelms him. While he lies there, someone approaches and notes that he has finally reached his limit. The newcomer checks him, finds he is burning with fever, and reminds him that he is still human. Nolan recognizes Astor, who explains that Earl Mays sent him to intervene if Nolan pushed himself too far. That mention makes Nolan briefly wonder why Mays is watching him so closely, though a more urgent thought interrupts him. Astor decides to fetch his sword and remove Nolan's muzzle so he can recover properly. Nolan stops him by grabbing his leg before he can leave. Astor demands an explanation for the sudden resistance. Nolan insists he cannot afford to break down now, because no one else will save his sister if he fails. With fierce resolve, he warns Astor not to interfere. Astor admits he does not understand Nolan's words, but he understands the refusal to give up. He warns Nolan that the people he made his promise to will not fight with the same fairness Nolan expects. That warning is immediately proven true as masked upperclassmen surround them in the forest. Among the onlookers, a girl mockingly points out how sick and weakened Astor looks. Lillian openly taunts him, joking that he already looks close enough to a corpse to be mistaken for one. Nolan recognizes her at once, and her presence confirms the threat. Astor challenges her intrusion, reminding her this is 4th grade training and she has no place here as a 2nd grader. Lillian casually explains that the 4th graders wanted to impress her, so she came to watch. She frames the ambush as a harmless visit and claims the instructor allowed it. Before anyone can de-escalate, the hostile group makes its move. Lillian reveals that what she truly came to see is Nolan brought low. She savors the idea of him kneeling in defeat. More than that, she wants to watch him beg her for mercy. She tells him not to resent her for enjoying what is about to happen. Then she gives the others permission to beat him as brutally as they want. As the attackers rush in, Nolan understands they intend to crush him before the final days of training are over. He blocks the first strike with his mana, but realizes with alarm that Aster has now been dragged into his fight. Aster joins him at his back, fending off blows despite the restriction that keeps knights from drawing swords. Surrounded and outnumbered, Nolan sees that trading direct blows will only wear them down. He decides he needs a cheap, decisive tactic to break the stalemate before his body gives out. While he fights, Lillian mocks the swordless knights for brawling in the dirt. She singles Nolan out as the most pitiful of all, blaming him for his own condition while pretending to admire his stubbornness. Her contempt only grows because he still refuses to surrender. Barely standing and burning through the last of his strength, Nolan endures her ridicule in silence. Aster suddenly senses a lethal opening and shouts for Nolan to dodge. A heavy attacker charged with purple mana lunges straight at Nolan from behind. Nolan notices the attack a moment too late and realizes he is in trouble. The blow lands hard and sends him crashing away. Blood bursts from Nolan's mouth as he understands the hit may have decided the fight. His body is hurled violently through the air and smashed onward by the force of the impact. A white-haired fighter fears he has just killed his masked opponent as the man is hurled away in the forest clash. From a tree, a purple-haired woman stops him from finishing the job because she wants the masked man kept alive for her own use. She clarifies that the target should only be beaten down, not executed. Her order is precise: leave him barely alive. Hearing that, the battered masked man suddenly realizes he still has a chance to turn the situation around. He releases a violent surge of red mana and lashes out before anyone can secure him. The woman's smug control breaks for a moment when the supposedly finished man moves unexpectedly. His power whips outward in a cutting arc as he launches himself back into the fight. Now fully focused, he reveals a cold, predatory resolve behind the bloody mask. His first strike slices into an attacker's arm, proving his mana can wound on contact. The injured soldier realizes too late that touching him let blade-like mana surge through his body. The masked man steadies himself as red mana coils around him like sharpened currents. One enemy tries to answer with a mana barrier, but immediately senses it is far too thin to stop him. Even so, that soldier commits to crushing him head-on with brute force. The masked man meets the charge without hesitation, extending his hand as if the outcome is already decided. His severing mana tears through the purple defense and blasts the attacker away in one clean exchange. He follows through by carving through another rushing opponent before the group can regroup. That second soldier crashes to the ground, badly cut and instantly removed from the fight. Watching from above, the woman is shaken that a mere 4th-grade fighter is already using a tribute shift. The remaining soldiers swarm him together, trying to overwhelm him with numbers before he can exploit that advantage further. He understands that what he is doing is far beyond ordinary reinforcement and has entered a much deadlier class of mana control. Red arcs spread around him in a lethal radius, forcing every attacker to fight inside the reach of his raw mana. As one enemy prepares another strike, the masked man compares his own severing attribute to his brother's fire attribute. Where fire burns whatever it touches, his power instead cuts apart anything that comes into contact with it. He demonstrates that principle directly, shredding through the surroundings and anyone reckless enough to close in. The soldiers recognize in alarm that this is an advanced technique many stronger fighters never master in their entire lives. He moves through them in a blur, turning every approach into another wound and every opening into a takedown. At that point, even the enemy side can no longer deny that he has become instantly lethal. He now stands as someone capable of killing with raw mana alone. The white-haired fighter studies him and quietly wonders whether this masked man is still truly beneath the level of the 7 wings. The purple-haired woman lands nearby, impressed by his display even as she prepares to reassert control. She dismisses the spectacle as insufficient, insisting that power like that still cannot stop her soldiers. Mocking him, she asks whether he has ever actually killed anyone, treating his restraint as inexperience. To underline her authority, she draws a dagger and channels purple mana through it. She orders her men to collect the bodies, reducing her fallen subordinates to disposable trash. That cruelty makes the white-haired fighter openly condemn her as filth, while the masked man remains silent. Without warning, the masked man cuts the fastening on his own muzzle-like restraint. The masks drop away around the battlefield, and the soldiers recoil as they realize something has changed. For the second time, the woman loses her composure when events slip outside her expectations. The soldiers stare at their bare faces in confusion, unable to understand how the masks vanished. One of them feels immediate relief, as if he can finally breathe again now that the restraint is gone. The white-haired fighter instantly understands the masked man's intent and curses him for what he has just done. The masked man has deliberately thrown the fight into chaos by freeing the enemy soldiers in the middle of battle. The woman laughs at first, convinced her pets will obediently put the masks back on once they finish feeding. But the men around her no longer look like loyal subordinates, and it becomes clear they know exactly where their hatred belongs. She panics and screams at them, demanding to know what they think they are doing. Instead of obeying, they close in on her, reminding her that she was the one who ordered them to seize him. At last she senses the danger personally and falters. Surrounded by the very soldiers she controlled, she can only ask in fear what they have become. The white-haired fighter answers that their souls are so rotten they remain monstrous even after being freed, and now that corruption is turning back on her. A smug noble provokes the masked young man to finally step forward and face their enemies himself. The purple-haired woman answers with open contempt, clearly unimpressed by the challenge. When the masked man stays silent, his companion notices the hesitation and presses him to respond. Trying to cover the silence, the blonde noble speaks on his behalf. The woman mocks the masked man's strength, arguing that someone capable of breaking his own mask should have no trouble acting. She ridicules him further for still enduring humiliation despite claiming he intends to crush House Almaheim. Her taunt turns sharper as she warns that his naivety will come back to destroy him. Left alone with the accusation, he silently accepts that warning as true. He admits he cannot act however he wants because he still carries his Viscount father's name. What truly restrains him is the fear of doing something that would make his father ashamed of him. His turmoil becomes so intense that the blonde noble realizes something is wrong and tries to stop him. The masked man starts to collapse before anyone can catch him. A red-haired woman suddenly throws herself in and catches him before he hits the ground. In his dazed state, he recognizes the person holding him as his sister Alphen. Alphen gently tells him he has not changed, and that he is still as reckless as ever. She apologizes that, despite being the older sister, she has always been the one he had to save. Holding him close, she says he gave her the courage she needed. She resolves that he can stop worrying now because she will be alright. He jolts awake in bed, crying out for his sister as if the encounter had only been a dream. The panic of the vision drives him upright immediately. Alone in the moonlit room, he wonders whether what he saw was merely a hallucination. Still shaken, he notices something hidden beneath the sheet beside him. He reaches down and picks up a folded letter. The sight of the note instantly alarms him. As he unfolds it, he realizes it is a message from Alphen and begs that she not tell him what he fears. The contents hit him so hard that he bolts from the bed at once. He rushes to leave, but someone intercepts him and tries to slow him down. A long-haired attendant warns that he is in no condition to be running anywhere. The crumpled letter falls to the floor at the attendant's feet. The attendant picks it up and begins reading Alphen's apology and thanks. Her letter says she is sorry for forcing a cowardly sister like herself to try to be brave for once. She explains that this time it is her turn to save him. She remembers how he once protected her at the sword dance festival and means to repay that debt. Ignoring the warning, he climbs out through the window, furious that Alphen would risk herself for him. As he races toward the estate doors, he can only think that if anything happens to her, none of this sacrifice will make sense. He bursts inside, demanding to know what she thought she was doing. The answer freezes him before he can take another step. He finds Alphen collapsed on the floor, while a blade in the foreground makes clear she has already been struck down. The purple-haired woman greets him lazily, treating the scene like a minor interruption. As armed men stand behind him, she mocks both siblings for lacking manners while he drops to Alphen's side. He desperately begs his sister to hold on as he lifts her into his arms. The woman reveals that Alphen came there to bargain for Aster's release because she believed he was going to die. She explains that the same terrified girl who had never once defied them suddenly confronted them with determination. Annoyed by that courage, the woman decided to toy with Alphen instead of ending things quickly. Hearing that, Aster is overcome with stunned rage. The woman casually admits she had already been irritated with him, and now plans to make him suffer as well. Cradling his dying sister, Aster blames himself for being too soft from the beginning. The woman reflects that she should never have bothered with deals and should have dragged the siblings out by force. Aster realizes that if he had acted decisively sooner, his sister would not have been driven to such a reckless sacrifice. A stern older man appears and cuts through the chaos, declaring that a knight must endure absurdity, and ordering someone named Tu to listen carefully. A knight reports in from the field, confirming his position and that the mission has succeeded. Elsewhere, a stern father teaches two young heirs that a knight's duty is to protect others, even when fighting would be easier. He presses the lesson further, insisting that pain and humiliation must never drive a knight's judgment. The boy challenges that logic, hearing it as a demand to endure attacks without resistance. His father corrects him and explains that the real danger is misreading one's purpose or striking at the wrong moment. He forces the boy to confront the deeper issue by asking why he carries a sword and what he truly fights for. The lesson ends with a warning that those answers must be settled in advance, before a real battle begins. That teaching collides with the present as Aster, too slow to react, realizes he should have answered that question long ago. A purple-haired attacker notices something unexpected as his sword slips across the floor instead of leaving him helpless. The falling blade suddenly changes course, drawn back toward Aster at the last instant. Aster catches it in a transformed, masked state, his power surging violently. Still clutching the injured red-haired woman, he drives the sword down and releases a burst of force. Golden energy erupts outward from him in a widening shockwave. The blast tears through the room and hurls the nearby attackers away. Even the blonde swordsman is caught off guard by the scale of it. The wave keeps expanding as Aster shields the woman and sweeps the battlefield clean around them. Inside that frenzy, Aster's mind fills with a ruthless command to exterminate the Alheim bloodline completely. The murderous impulse swells until it narrows into a single order to kill everyone. The wounded woman, recognizing his collapse into bloodlust, weakly begs Aster to stop. Her voice triggers a memory, and Aster realizes this loss of control mirrors a previous disaster. Outside, a woman sensing the mana spike immediately understands that something impossible is happening. Her alarm hardens into suspicion as she recognizes the danger in that power. A nearby officer watches in tense silence, measuring the situation. Another observer is stunned that Aster may have truly gone berserk. Seeing the light pouring from the building, he fears for Aster and rushes his attention toward the fight. Inside, Aster stands over the fallen woman with his sword raised, consumed by the storm of his own power. He swings down toward the purple-haired attacker without regard for anything else around him. She barely throws herself aside, realizing she was an instant from being cut down. Aster's killing focus shifts as he detects a new threat entering his range. The blonde swordsman intercepts, striking into Aster's attack and pulling the fight onto himself. The purple-haired woman calls him brother, and he gleefully identifies Aster as one of the 7 wings. He is impressed that Aster can unleash such power while standing on the edge of death. As the energy tears through the hall, he questions whether Aster can really sustain this state much longer. Still taunting him, he mocks the idea that Aster endured torture only to save his companions and demands a response. Aster answers with another charge, letting actions speak where words cannot. He crashes forward in a savage rush, trying to overwhelm the blonde man outright. The blonde swordsman meets him with amused contempt, treating Aster's silence as part of the game. Their blades and auras collide head-on, filling the chamber with red and gold force. Enjoying the clash, the blonde man declares that he intended to crush Aster himself and invites a decisive duel. Aster, still masked and burning with rage, commits fully to the fight. The two powers smash together again in a violent explosion of opposing energy. Nearby soldiers panic and warn each other to flee before they are caught in the crossfire. The purple-haired woman can only stare, unable to understand how Aster is still fighting like this. What shocks her most is that he is doing it while carrying the burden of protecting his injured companion. Even the blonde swordsman admits Aster never showed this much mana in their earlier encounter, revealing that this is what happens when 2 restraints break at once. He responds by unleashing his own full strength, driving the duel into an all-out exchange. The shock of their battle throws the red-haired woman across the floor, leaving her even more vulnerable. Yet Aster does not break stride, attacking so relentlessly that it seems he has forgotten her entirely. As he rushes past her, the others realize his berserk state has severed his awareness of the very person he was trying to protect. Watching this, the blonde swordsman stops mocking for a moment, and wonders what force is truly driving Aster now. Aster launches himself back into the fight under a ruthless command to exterminate the enemy completely. That killing intent sharpens into an order to leave not a single drop of the Elhim bloodline alive. Even while in pain, Aster forces his body forward through the storm of mana. The blonde swordsman realizes Aster is trying to strip away his mana again and braces against it. Refusing to be deprived of his power twice, the blonde man counters with a violent rush. A nearby ally warns her brother that something is wrong with his mana. Aster answers by unleashing a surge of golden slashes that tears through the hall. The blonde fighter is caught off guard when he senses the attack behaving in an unexpected way. The slashes wrap around him instead of simply passing by, closing in from every side. He realizes too late that the cuts are not ending on impact but continuing to spread over him. As the wounds crawl up his body, he understands Aster's mana can climb and keep cutting. He detonates his own power outward in a burst of heat to break the attack off. The explosion clears the immediate danger and blasts Aster away across the floor. Standing in the crater of his own release, the blonde man admits Aster's slashing attribute is rare and genuinely dangerous. He concedes that this is the first time someone's mana has made him feel truly threatened, though he still treats it as a clever trick. Then he reveals the real nature of his power. It is not merely heat. By driving his blade into the ground, he turns the floor around him into a searing field. With a grin, he declares his mana lethally hot. Aster stares back, recognizing the danger but not retreating. The blonde man boasts that his presence alone crushes others' will to resist, and that true strength belongs to the one who can make others submit. He dismisses resistance itself as weakness and claims domination is the only proof of real power. Aster rejects that philosophy outright, deciding that only the one still standing at the end matters. He drives his own mana up again, forcing himself back into a fighting stance despite the damage. The blonde swordsman mocks that resolve as nothing more than pathetic struggling. He charges in with overwhelming force, trying to finish Aster head-on. Aster keeps moving through the assault even as his own body is torn apart, sustaining himself by sheer will. Watching in horror, the white-haired girl realizes he is mutilating himself just to stay in the fight. The sight stirs the red-haired girl's memory of Aster from 7 years earlier. She recalls the same self-destructive determination driving him as he fought through his own injuries. In that earlier rampage, he had become a disaster that even their father could only contain from a distance while risking his life. Afterward, the family was left shaken, and Aster stood apart from them in silence. She came to believe he never forgave himself for what happened. Because he thought his mana had hurt the people closest to him, he learned to turn that harm onto himself instead. Back in the present, Aster and the blonde swordsman clash again at close range. As she watches from the floor, the red-haired girl wonders why Aster always aims the blade at himself like this. The exchange ends with Aster thrown hard across the room, his sword skidding away from him. The red-haired girl freezes as the outcome suddenly looks final. Aster lies sprawled and motionless for a moment, apparently beaten. Approaching through the smoke, the blonde man grudgingly praises Aster's tenacity. But his respect turns immediately back into contempt as he decides Aster should simply die. He prepares to execute him, sneering that stubborn failures only disgust him. Then he abruptly senses something wrong before he can strike. Fresh cuts burst across his body all at once, as if Aster's slashes had remained hidden inside him. Shocked, He realizes the wounds are disabling his arm and that he never noticed when the damage was planted. Aster rises again, bloodied and steaming, still forcing himself onward. His mask cracks as he coughs blood, showing how close he is to collapse. Even so, he erupts with another savage surge of mana and a raw scream of defiance. The blonde swordsman is shaken to find that Aster is still advancing. Aster lunges straight at him, and for the first time the blonde man recognizes the situation is turning bad. Aster closes in with a feral, unwavering focus, ready to decide the fight in the next instant. Aster, already strained and sweating, loses control as violent power surges around him. He charges the blonde opponent in a reckless burst, turning the fight into a direct clash. Alphen rushes in and desperately begs Aster to stop before he goes too far. She throws herself onto him, trying to physically hold him back and make him stop destroying himself. Her voice cuts through his frenzy enough for him to recognize his sister. Alphen endures the backlash of his power, grimacing as she clings to him. Aster starts to realize he has been acting blindly under the influence of his raging mana. Even as he understands it, he fears suppressing that power will only leave his sister vulnerable. A sudden shout interrupts him and snaps his attention elsewhere. Maze bursts in and hurls something toward Aster, urging him to use it. Aster recognizes the thrown weapon as Gram, the sword he needs. He catches the sword mid-chaos before his unstable power can spiral further. The moment Gram reaches his hand, it begins absorbing the excess mana flooding out of him. Aster feels the change immediately as the madness loosens its grip. Still shielding Alphen, he steadies himself with the sword raised and the danger finally contained. Alphen, relieved he is back to himself, tells him she is just glad he survived. Aster answers that she was the reckless one for throwing herself into his rampage. He realizes Gram prevented a disaster by absorbing the mana that would have made things end far worse. Maze lingers at the doorway, awkwardly aware he arrived in the middle of an intimate moment. Aster, embarrassed and irritated, calls Maze out for intruding so badly. The blonde fighter rises from the smoke and warns everyone not to mistake his injuries for weakness. From Aster and Alphen's side, the threat is clear. Even wounded and unable to use his arms properly, the man still intends to kill. He states that plainly, reigniting the tension with murderous confidence. Before the fight can resume, senior figures arrive and shut the confrontation down, judging the abnormal mana and destruction as enough. A stern woman identifies the black-haired boy by his full name, Aster F. Yulheim, and takes command of the scene. She orders Aster restrained, shocking Alphen as he is treated like the culprit. Guards force him to the floor while Alphen can only watch in alarm. The blonde man turns to the woman and demands to know why she is protecting Aster instead of finishing him. She explains that a report had already come in that Aster injured more than 10 cadets during training. In her judgment, that was a disgraceful breach of conduct the Academy cannot ignore. Alphen protests that Aster would never have attacked cadets like that without reason. Pinned down, Aster realizes Lillian is manipulating the situation behind the scenes. The woman continues building the case, pointing to the wreckage as proof that Aster cannot control the dangerous power he wields. The guard's presence reinforces her claim that he has become a threat to everyone around him. She declares that even his family name will not save him if he keeps dragging the Yulheim name down. Her ruling follows immediately. An inquiry will decide his punishment, but for now he should prepare to leave the academy. Alphen is devastated and refuses to accept that outcome. Maze quietly reflects that the crisis he feared has finally arrived and that he had warned Aster to be careful. He also admits he cannot openly defend Aster any further without endangering his own position, even if he does not want to lose him. Aster suddenly erupts with force, blasting the guards away and breaking free despite his restraints. He lands on his feet as the room scatters around him, making it clear he will not submit quietly. The woman coldly remarks that stealing the victor's moment is hardly acceptable, framing his defiance as insolence. The blonde man backs her up, accusing Aster of barging in and taking the spotlight that should have belonged to him. The woman, now suspicious, demands an explanation for Aster's true motive. Aster reveals he cannot let himself be expelled under these circumstances because it would look like a petty act of revenge by his mother. He tells her that if anyone is going to kill him, it should be him, and until then she should stay out of it because this only stains the family name further. His mother is furious that he would openly defy her, especially when his brother Patrick had always obeyed. The blonde man dismisses her authority over him as well, claiming his own bloodline outranks hers and warning her to back off. She falls silent, forced to weigh the challenge instead of answering immediately. At last she withdraws from the argument, telling him to do as he pleases for now but warning that next time he must prove his defiance with results instead of words. A red-haired woman coldly refuses to recognize either the Seven Wings or the black-haired young man as worthy of acknowledgement. The battered young man meets that rejection without backing down, while the woman behind him is shaken by the hostility in the room. A blonde, scarred man steps in beside him, drawing his attention and shifting the confrontation toward unfinished business between them. The young man stops him and demands to know what happens to the agreement they made. The blonde man admits the deal no longer matters, because the iron shackles that once restrained him have been reduced to little more than symbols. The ruined restraints lying broken nearby confirm that the balance of power has already changed. Freed from any real limitation, the blonde man tells them they are now free to act as they please. He dismisses the escaping enemies as beneath his concern, making clear he has no interest in pursuing minor prey. As he walks away, he warns them not to flee, because he intends to settle everything once they have dealt with the Seven Wings. With that threat hanging over them, the night's chaos comes to a close. The blonde man departs, and after several days pass, the survivors are left to live with what happened. When the young man returns to his group, they greet him with relief and excitement, treating him like the leader who made it back. His companions ask after his injuries and praise him for the ferocity he showed in the battle. He rejects their praise, insisting he is no boss and feeling he failed despite surviving. What haunts him most is how close he came to watching his comrades die before he could save them. One of the men pushes back against that guilt by reminding him that everyone captured by the Iron Leads returned safely. The others eagerly agree and credit their survival to the stand he made for them. But in his own mind, their rescue was not his victory at all, because it came from Elheim, the enemy they were supposed to oppose. That contradiction leaves him disgusted with himself, feeling unworthy even with the 7 wings in his possession. A comrade physically stops his spiral and urges him not to be so harsh on himself. He is reminded that he entered enemy territory alone and risked everything to save one of their own. His friend adds that no one would lose respect for him over protecting even a 14-year-old companion. The whole group backs that up, assuring him that every one of them still stands with him. Hearing that unanimous support leaves him quietly stunned. Once the mood lightens, a friend turns the conversation toward the red-haired woman and asks what became of his relationship with his sister. The mention of her brings back the unresolved distance between them. He admits that after finally spending real time together, the two of them still failed to clear the air. Since then, the separation between them has only continued. Lying alone later, he reflects that he still has not managed to speak properly with Alphen. He realizes they have both been avoiding each other, and he suspects guilt is the real reason for the awkwardness between them. The thought exhausts him, and he bitterly concludes that the emotional distance remains whether the iron shackles exist or not. A knock interrupts his brooding, and he sits up to answer. He tells the visitor to come in because the door is unlocked. The moment he sees who has arrived, his composure breaks in surprise. Alphen stands at his door and asks to talk, saying she has been thinking over what happened at Reigenheim and wants to face it with him.